Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the City Council meeting for Monday, January 13th, 2025. If I could ask all of those in attendance, if they are able to please rise for the playing of the National Anthem and a moment of reflection. Please be seated. And on a personal note, I'll just say thank you for singing along. I appreciate it when the gallery sings along. At this time, I will look to Councillor Ratzlaff to read the land acknowledgement.
The land on which Council meets today is a traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations people, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many Indigenous peoples made up of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement should remind us of our collective responsibility to ensure the territories on which we live and work, is never emptied, and that we take care of the land and its inhabitants in a way that ensures its future sustainability.
Thank you, Councillor Ratzlaff. Good evening, everybody, to our first meeting back after the holidays. I will start with the mayor's report. I do want to let everybody in attendance know, I know we have a large group here, specifically with respect to the motion on parking on Towering Heights Boulevard. We will be moving that up to the front of the agenda after we get through some of the pieces we have to get through first. So for those of you who are here for that item, it will be relatively quickly on the agenda. But before we do that, we do have to get through the mayor's report. I wanted to take a time at the beginning of the mayor's report tonight to congratulate a group of local dancers. I had the opportunity this evening to meet with 3 local dancers from St. Catharines, Leah Clark, Penelope Salinas, and Hadley Sim, who recently returned from the International Dance Organization Ballet, Modern Contemporary, Acro, and Jazz World Championships in Kielce, Poland. You can hear them jangling up to the front with all of their hardware. Between the 3 of them, they brought back several world championship medals, 3 golds, 1 silver, and 2 bronze. The girls train at 2 local dance studios at Broadway Lights and Dance Station's Dance Academy. Congratulations to Leah, Penelope, and Hadley for your amazing accomplishments at the World Championship, and thank you for representing St. Catharines so well on the worldwide stage. And in just a moment, I'm going to ask Council to come on up so we can take a group photo with the ladies. But before we do that, can we get a round of applause for these amazing young ladies? And with that, councillors, it's time for the thing we as politicians are best at, and that is a photo op, so come on up. Without a doubt, that is my absolute favorite part of this job. All right. One more time. Sure, let's do it. And to the chamber, thank you again for that. Sincerely appreciated. I want to thank the residents of St. Catharines for joining myself and council at the annual New Year's Day levy. Big thank you goes out to the Lincoln Welland Regiment and the 10th Battery RCA for hosting the event and helping us start a new year together. Last week, I had the opportunity to meet with the new commissioner of the OHL, Brian Crawford. It was a great meeting, and the team, along with myself, had the opportunity to advocate to him that St. Catharines would be a great host for the 2027 Memorial Cup, and I'm happy to report that he agreed it would be a great host, and is still one of the premier facilities in the Canadian Hockey League. I want to send a big congratulations to Taylor and Shane, the co-owners of Beechwood Donuts, located in our downtown core, on their 10th anniversary. Here's to many more years of delicious donuts and successful business. I did want to give an update on the First Street Louth water main break. This has been ongoing since Friday. It's been a challenging water main break on First Street, Louth, and Grapeview Drive. The break impacted both city and region infrastructure and residents in the First Street, Louth, Grapeview, Arion Road areas. Repairs for the complex water main break commenced and have been ongoing and will continue into this evening. To support our residents, there is a water truck that is available from 5 until 8 p.m. tonight at Grapeview School. And all of that has been put out onto social media to try and inform as many residents as possible. I want to thank staff for their efforts in working through the complexities of the break, and to residents specifically for their patience and understanding in this matter. I want to assure our community that crews are making every effort to restore water service as soon as possible. The city's social media and the city website are the best place to go for updates, and those channels will be updated as soon as there's additional information. I'm just looking to Mr. Anders if he has anything he wants to add.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just got an update from the supervisor. 2 of 3 connections have been completed, and they're just working on the 3rd now.
Excellent. So that is excellent news for the residents in the area, and hopefully all services are returned to normal as soon as possible. Finally, a couple of upcoming events. The next Town Hall STC meeting will be in St. Patrick's Ward, and it'll take place on February 19th at the Armenian Community Center at 156 Martindale Road. It'll run from 5:30 until 7:30 p.m. Residents are encouraged to attend their own ward's Town Hall STC event. However, they are welcome to attend any and all Town Hall STC events across the city. Pre-registration is recommended, and if you wish to speak at the event, please note this when registering and you'll be given priority. You can head to stcatharines.ca/townhallstc to register. I want just add the note that the Town Hall STC that was originally scheduled for Port Dalhousie Ward, it was scheduled for the 22nd of January, has been postponed, and that'll be rescheduled to a date in the summer of 2025. On Tuesday, February the 4th, 2025, from 7 to 9 a.m., you can warm your head, your heart, and fill your tummy by helping support eviction and homelessness prevention in your community. We invite you and the whole family to join the Housing Help Program staff from Community Care and myself at Market Square in downtown St. Catharines for the 25th annual Took Tuesday Mayor's Pancake Breakfast. The proceeds from the event will support the Housing Help Program of Community Care and the homelessness prevention services they deliver to those most vulnerable in the community. Raising the Roof toques and baseball caps will be sold for $20, and a pancake breakfast is complimentary with your purchase. They take cash, debit, and credit card. And finally, on February 27th, you can join me at my annual State of the City address in partnership with the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce. This year's event will take place at Club Roma from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Lunch will be served, and tickets can be found at gncc.ca. I look forward to seeing everybody there. At this time, I will open things up to any additional items that members of council would like to add. I will ask, as we are quite full and have a number of things on the docket, if we could keep it brief as much as possible. Councillor Lindell.
On Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at Seymour Hanna Complex, the Brock Junior Girls Badger House League Winter Classic is happening. Girls hockey is absolutely growing and huge and can be attested to by the U13 division alone, which has 27 teams coming from around Ontario and one from Nunavut. And they're all excited to see the mayor.
Still amazes me that that's a thing, but okay. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a reminder, everyone, that January is Crime Stoppers Month, hence the less formal attire tonight. And there's a flag raising tomorrow here at City Hall, and they're doing flag raisings throughout the region the month of. And it's been here since 1985, and it's totally anonymous. If you think there's a crime or something that might be a crime, you call that, no one will ever know who you are, and if it's legit, then it'll get fixed. So support Crime Stoppers.
Thank you, Councillor. 1-800-222-TIPS. Gotcha. Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's important that we acknowledge and recognize the passing of Eleanor Lancaster, who served our community very well in a lot of different ways, including serving on Regional Council for, I believe, 9 years. But her accomplishments are immense. She was the first female appointed to the Ontario Environmental Assessment Board, and she served as vice chair. She was a passionate advocate and supporter of children's health and well-being, and she was a trailblazer in a lot of different ways. So, and I know there's some people around this council chamber who know her well, and probably in the gallery as well. So, condolences to the family and the loved ones of Eleanor, a great community leader.
Thank you, Councillor Williamson. Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to remind our residents that there are 2 outdoor ice rinks operating this year, both of them in Grantham Ward, not to brag. I guess it's because Grantham's a little farther north than everybody else, and maybe our temperature is colder up there, I don't know.
That's exactly it, Councillor. It's the climate in Grantham.
I think so. But anyways, there is ice there. It's been busy, I've been told. One is at the Port Weller Community Center, and the other is along Walker's Creek. A credit to the volunteers who are maintaining it, and it's open to everybody in St. Catharines. So,
thank you, Councillor. I don't have anybody else on the board. I am just going to add one cautionary note. Something that I've noticed, and I'm sure some of us have noticed, folks starting to inhabit the outdoor ponds and larger natural water features. I'm just going to send my note of caution. None of those water features have been tested to see how thick the ice is, and I would express a great deal of caution to residents to be very careful if you are venturing out. It is not recommended. I think city staff would probably say, please don't. I noticed a few people out testing the waters, Martindale Pond on the weekend, and I definitely don't think it's been cold enough for that to be an appropriate ice surface. So a cautionary tale and a cautionary note to residents in the community that none of these areas have been tested, and so none of it is deemed safe by the city of St. Catharines. I'm just looking at Mr. Christie. Did I say anything incorrect there, Mr. Christie? No? Wonderful. All right, we will move on to the adoption of the agenda. As mentioned, we have had a request from Councillors Kushner and Harris that we move item 10.1 up, and so we will be moving item 10.1 to right after declarations of interest. I will look to the acting clerk.
The following amendments have been made to the agenda this evening. Item 10.1, parking on Towering Heights Boulevard, will be discussed after item 4, followed by the remainder of the agenda. And the following items of additional correspondence have been placed in Council Sugar Sync folder. Will also be part of the Council correspondence listing for January 16th, 2025, which is found on the city's website. And correspondence from Emergency Management Group, Fire Prevention Officer Mentorship Program.
Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Councillor Harris and Councillor Phillips. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Can I have a motion to adopt the minutes from December 16th? Councillor Lindell, Councillor Dodge, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest this evening? Seeing none, then we will move on to item 10.1, which is the motion with respect to Towering Heights. Just give me a moment. Prior to discussing the motion, council will hear delegations from Steve Walton and Michael Thompson. At this time, I will call upon Steve Walton to speak. And Councillor Harris, I'm going to ask if maybe you can come over and just help him with the lectern so we get it at the appropriate height. All right, Mr. Walton, the lectern is yours.
Yeah.
Mr. Walton, the one thing I will ask is if you can just make sure you're speaking directly into the microphone so folks at home can hear you as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
How's that? Good. Okay, yeah. Good evening, Mayor Cisco, staff, and councillors. I want to let you know I appreciate the opportunity to speak here on behalf of the residents here of 1632 and Towering Heights Boulevard on the issue of the visitor parking. Oh, I'm sorry, of the another issue of the street parking. At the time of the initial presentation of our petition to the Transportation Department, many issues were addressed, and at that time, city staff position was denial of our request and turned back to the city council to seek decisions. I have since submitting my petition on Friday, I've been provided good news from Councilors Matt and Joe Harris that city staff has revisited our request and are now in a position to accept residents' request with some modifications. As a result, most of my slides tonight are redundant because they were to kind of counteract some of the issues before. So I will be jumping quite ahead of a lot of these slides. Since council will now be ultimately approving or denying our request, I would like to give council a quick rundown of the numbers of parking spaces and or shall I say lack of parking spaces. So we have a true understanding of the seriousness of the residents' dilemma, which will justify why the turnout is so large this evening. If I can ask you to turn, the council to turn to the gallery, I'd like to just show you the numbers here, and I'd like to ask how many people are in favor of the street parking issue here? Okay, looks pretty good to me.
So
and I understand.
I will ask that we not refer to the gallery. I understand the purpose for that.
Okay.
Just in general, we don't solicit feedback from the gallery. It can be off-putting for others.
Okay, fine. Okay, thank you. And the other room that's full over here, apparently, right?
I am very aware of that.
Okay. The numbers we're looking at here, the condos across the street from us, there are 324 units with 81 visitor spots. The three buildings that are requesting the street parking have 493 units with 28 visitor spaces. That represents 169 additional units, yet we have 28 visitor spaces. That's an average. The condo ratio is 1 visitor space per every 4 units. The other buildings are 1 visitor space per every 18 units. So you can see quite the discrepancy there. Now, to add insult to injury, all those 81 visitor spots in the condos are free, whereas all the 3 buildings now are pay to park, where guests are required to pay $1.50 per hour to visit. Now, you're all familiar with that issue. I need not say any more on that at this time because you've been through that and it's now in the hands of the provincial government. I will jump to slide 8 here. This is the area that we requested. It's the northeast side of Towering Heights Boulevard. Is it quite big? Good. So you can see on the east side of the street, we have about 20 vehicles. That's our requested area there. We don't see any issues with that, and apparently now I see that the staff department doesn't have too many issues with it now as well. But they did make a suggestion. And they are willing to put it on the west side of the street, which I'm sure that's not an issue for anybody. I don't think we're too concerned about what side of the street it's on. However, we will lose approximately 5 vehicles of our requested area at that point. And hopefully we can move it somewhere else to gain some other space or some other spots. Okay, so we need many other spots as well. The other spot that we had requested was on the east side up, as you see the cars on the left side of the screen. there's approximately 8 vehicles there. We haven't really had any denial yet on that, or we're not sure. I know that the city staff has said they don't want any areas in the S-curve. There are other options. This is another section here. There are other options that I think we can look at, and I'm sure that the staff is willing to work with the city, have we get this, work with the residents to try and find some other spaces as well. So that's about it. I see I got over 5 minutes already. So I'd like to just solicit, on behalf of all the residents of the area, I'd like to solicit the councilor's support of the motion. And I hope we can work with city staff to try and come up with a few extra spots. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walton. Are there any questions? Councillor Harris.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the presenter. So if we approve this for the west side, or the east side first, which would be east, yes, would it make sense to add to the motion that we approve the east side and direct staff to work with the area residents to try to accommodate more parking in other spaces? Or other, like to consult with the residents to look for other options as well?
Yes, I think I was under the understanding that this was something we might do is to put that into the motion to continue to work with the staff. I'm sure, like there are some areas there, as you see, that the bends and that they're concerned about. But I'm sure there's other areas we can find. We have a few options, suggestions that we can make just to gain the loss, because we went from 20. If this is approved tonight by council, we've gone from the requested 20 there on that section to we've lost 5 there, and then the other 8 on the other one. We would lose 13 altogether that way. So I would like to, if this can be approved tonight on the west side, that's wonderful. We know then we've got at least 13 to 14 spots, and if we can work with the city to try and get some better more spaces, that would be wonderful.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question I have is, you had some temporary parking on the street because there is construction in the area, and that temporary parking worked out very well, did it not?
Yeah, it certainly did. In fact, if you look at these, if anyone's wondering why these vehicles are here, there's no parking on the street, but there's all these cars parked there. This is all what happens when they clean the underground parking lot for the buildings. They need somewhere to put the cars. So they put the vehicles, they bag the meters or the signs, and people park out in that area. And right through the center, you can see through here as well. There's some this is an empty lot that eventually they're going to be building. We don't know when, but they're going to be building the other tower. So they park in there. But there's options. I mean, that's once a year they clean the streets. We can park there. We can park. There's other spots that we can park if they need to up the street. If they need to clean the thing once a year, we certainly don't want that to be a hindrance to our parking now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kushner. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, thank you for your presentation tonight. I have in my ward, I have an apartment complex that my colleague is probably familiar with as well, where we get a lot of phone calls during the winter months. Any concern with snow removal when there's a heavy snowfall within that area? It's hard for me to kind of get a glimpse of how wide that street actually is, but would it turn into a one-way in and out access point?
Yeah. To answer that question, I think I'll show you first what we've got. If you take a look, if you go to this screen up here, you see you can see the width of the street by looking at the cars. You've got 2 cars passing, and you've got lots of room there. Okay, so the street's very wide. You take that street and you compare it with Jacobson Avenue or something, or any spots in the city. I can name 100 streets: the West End, Lisgar, Monk Street, Bellevue Terrace, all through Central Town. All those streets that have parking in there that are very, very narrow to get by, that you need to pull over to have a car pass, right? And those are all they're allowed, and that's got to be a nightmare for a plow. And I used to plow. I worked at Atlas Steel in Welland, and there was I used to do the snow removal on the plow, and that's like a city in there. I don't know if you've ever been in there, but there's roads all over the place. There's 9 miles of railway tracks coming in and out, crossing the roads. There's tow motors. There's all kinds of traffic there, and try to plow through there. So I know what it's like. It could be a nightmare for these guys. But I think if you asked any of these drivers, excuse me for a minute. You give any of these snowplow drivers an option to plow any one of those other streets that we just mentioned in the city, or Towering Heights, they'd chop at the bit to come down here and do that street. There's no obstacles there at all, as you can see how wide it is. That's
Thank you, and I appreciate how passionate you are about this too. So thank you.
I think we're all just as passionate. I speak for everyone here. I really do. And when you know what these residents have gone through, and as I say, this is a separate issue, but it's been brought on by the visitor paid parking issue, and we're not going to discuss that here, but we're working on that as well. The same people that are here tonight are the same people that are trying to fight for the visitor paid parking as well. So we're all very passionate on this subject.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Townsend. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just, one thing I might just want to add, I don't know if you know, you might not, unless you've talked with staff, your parking, the spots you think you have there might not be as many as you think right now, because there is a bylaw, and staff will tell us that you have to be set back so far from a driveway or a corner. So those pictures right now, like that motorcycle is illegal, the first car is illegal. So I hope you know that. You're not going to get the spots. There's not that many as what you parked on, maybe. Just so you know that. If you park past it, you guys are all getting tickets. So just that you're aware of that.
Honor. I'm fully aware of that. I mean, these are rough figures. These are rough numbers. I mean, there's 5 in the one there. We would lose 1 here because it's close to the end. Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. But I mean, we're willing to work. We're not a lynch mob here. We're willing to work with the city on anything to try and gain as many spaces acceptable to staff that we can do. So.
All right, thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Ratzlaff.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Mr. Walton, we've talked on the phone a number of times about the visitor paid parking. And I'm just wondering, related to that, there's some buildings in my ward as well that are experiencing the paid parking issue the same as you. But I'm wondering, the parking on the street, are you anticipating visitors to those buildings using that parking, or is it mostly going to be used by residents? I'm just wondering who you're anticipating being able to use those spots.
Well, I mean, being a public street, we can't very well tell people where they park, but it's mainly for visitors. Yes, it's mainly for visitors. The only issue that we could possibly have with residents, and this is possible. Some people, there's always someone who likes to abuse the system and likes to save some money. So it's possible that you may have a tenant somewhere in one of the buildings that may want to decide to park on the road and save some money, paying for the parking or something like that. I mean, that's something, if it gets abused, that we can certainly, I'm sure that we can address and, solve that issue with the city with maybe some no overnight parking or something like that or whatever. I'm sure the cities, they can work something out that way to help us if there's an issue with that. But.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. I look forward to continue working with you to solve or to address the visitor paid parking in my ward and yours.
We need all the support we can get.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ratzlaff. Seeing no other questions, thank you, sir, for your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. And I please solicit your vote, please. Thank you.
All right.
One more time.
I'll now call upon Michael Thompson to speak. Mr. Thompson, the lectern's yours.
Thank you, Mayor Cisco, councillors, senior staff. I've resided at 16 Towering Heights for about 8 years now. 16 was built back in 1974, was first occupied, was one of the buildings in the Waco development. 25 visitor parking spots initially, which serviced the building quite fine. But maybe it was 3 years ago now that the building was sold to Homestead Properties. And shortly after, we found that in all of those years, apparently 16 had been encroaching on the city easement on 16 Towering Heights. So the 2 visitors parking lots that we had were reconstructed, and we lost all of the spots that were at the front of the building, and our visitors lot on the side of the building ended up at 7 spots. 16 has a much older clientele. There are still residents that were original back in the early 70s. So this requires quite an influx of support, PSWs, home care, family visiting, meal delivery. The 7 spots are very inadequate. This is why for 16's case, we're requesting the additional parking on the street, the one side only. Street, as Steve has mentioned, is quite wide, and I also ran a snow plowing company, and I see that there would not be an issue getting a plow down with the one side parking. And it's very much an issue of day-to-day living that's being affected, separate from the issue that the visitors parking is paid. It's simply the minimal number of 7. We have 135 units, rough estimate, over 400 residents, and the daily interaction, family coming to visit, all of the other aspects of that. This is why we are requesting your support from council and staff to consider whatever's deemed to be correct for parking on 16 Towering Heights. Much appreciate Steve's effort leading this, and also the effort of our ward councillors. Joe and Matt have been excellent working with us to bring this forward and advocate and attempt to get a resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Are there any questions for the delegate? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for your presentation. Can I have a motion to receive the delegations? Councillor Harris, Councillor Kushner. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. So we have moving the motion, Councillor Kushner. Seconding the motion is Councillor Harris. The motion is up on the screen. Councillor Kushner, would you like to speak to this? Councillor Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That should be Councillor Harris moving it and myself seconding it. But I'll take this opportunity to speak now, Mr. Mayor.
I will just say I appreciate it when the A-team is able to, trade off back and forth. So thank you for that, Councillor Kushner.
Mr. Mayor, the residents are extremely pleased with the new buildings. They're very, very happy until they got a notification that there would be charges for the visitor parking. That was not in the rental contract, so they're extremely surprised. And what we find now is with the paid parking, some people are hesitant to visit, family members and PSWs, and therefore the people in those buildings become more and more isolated. And we had talked to staff, and staff said there are no technical problems with the recommendation that we're making this evening. And when I talked to the residents, Mr. Mayor, I said, under your leadership, this council makes the right decisions and they make them very quickly. So I look forward. Thank you.
Who am I to disagree with the voice of experience and institutional knowledge around our horseshoe? Councillor Harris.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure who I should address this to because neither Steve Bittner or Brian Appleby are here, so I'm not sure who could answer my question.
It'd be Mr. Martuccio, probably.
Can we get some sort of timeline on when we can do this? And you could probably tell me how you're going to engage the residents to ensure the maximum parking is achieved?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, if this is passed by council, it's something that staff could start working on right away. We will obviously take a look at the street to see where we think parking should be implemented, and just based on the volume of residents that are involved, it'd probably be something that we use Engage STC as a platform of engaging the residents for their feedback on our proposals.
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Director of Engineering, Facilities, and Environmental Services, I'm going to make a suggestion since it might be easier to engage the residents. They have a common room and you could actually call a meeting, but I still would like to have an actual time frame.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, this is something we would aim to look at implementing Q2 of 2024.
Which is when?
It'd be the first half of this year. I mean, sorry, 2025, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williamson.
Mr. Mayor, through you to Planning Department. When the two newer buildings were approved, was there a compromise in terms of the unit to parking ratio? And is the problem, and I probably should have asked one of the presenters, is the problem a result of the inhabitants of the new buildings as opposed to the existing buildings? Thank you.
Through the mayor to the councillor, my understanding is that the two new homestead buildings that are up, they actually exceeded their parking requirement. I don't have the exact number, but I think they had approximately 40 to 50 parking spaces above and beyond what our bylaw would normally require. I think part of the issue is the proportion of spaces that they assigned to be visitor spaces may not have been sufficient for their operations. That's what we're hearing. But they did comply with their bylaw requirements.
Thank you. And probably cause for speculation here on your part, which I know people don't like to do, professional staff members. When the original Waco buildings were approved, would it have been at a higher standard? There would have been more parking per unit?
Through the mayor to the councillor, my recollection is the previous bylaws actually had different parking requirements depending on whether the building was rental or condo. So our old bylaws required 1.5 spaces per unit if it was condo, 1.25 per unit if it was rental. We harmonized those in our 2013 bylaws, so we no longer have different standards depending on tenure. So I would imagine that any of the existing buildings that are condo ownership would have had a higher parking requirement at the time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Harris, I'm going to ask you to blink out for a second, and you can speak for a second time once everybody else has had their chance. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question to staff. A lot of times we always request traffic studies or anything before something like this is done. There's been conversations with staff. Is that on record, and is that good enough instead of having a report brought to council?
Mr. Martuccio.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, this is something that our staff are able to do within their scope of work.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Phillips.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. To planning, do we have the right through the site plan agreement to indicate to the developer that they cannot charge for parking on their site? Because to me, I give this company absolutely no credit for doing this. If I want to go and visit a parent or a friend for an evening, it's going to cost me $5 every time I go. Or parents or PSWs cost money for them to go. To me, it's absolutely ridiculous that this is happening. Do we have the right at that time to say, yeah, you can build it, but you can never charge for parking?
Through the mayor to the councillor, unfortunately not. The city doesn't have the ability to regulate whether or not the owner can, what they can charge to provide that service, to provide the visitor parking. We can't oblige them to maintain it free of charge.
Thank you. That's unfortunate.
Are there any other speakers? Okay, so Councillor Harris, you're up for a second time. I will, however, just ask, your ward mate has stated that we make this decision quickly, and I would hate for you to make him a liar by dragging this out. Councillor Harris.
I just wanted to touch on what Councillor Phillips and Councillor Williamson were talking about. Is there, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the manager of planning services, when an applicant comes to the city, is there a method that you can ensure that a certain number of visitor parking is provided, especially when we have an aging population and we talked about PSWs and things like that?
Through the mayor to the councillor, as I mentioned earlier, that our bylaw does have a requirement of 1.25 spaces per unit, so that's the minimum parking they have to provide. And that is intended to be inclusive of both dedicated, like assigned spaces and visitor spaces. But we don't have any bylaw that specifies precisely how many visitor spaces they need to provide. We certainly encourage it through the site plan process, but our bylaw just requires that a certain number of spaces be provided on the property, and then it leaves it to the owner of the property to deal with the operations.
So I guess my follow-up question through the mayor to the manager of planning services, is there a way that we could actually do that?
Through the mayor to the councillor, yes.
Okay.
There are a number of municipalities that don't lump in their parking requirements together. They have a separate provision to deal specifically with the provision of visitor parking. That's not something St. Catharines has ever done, but it is an option.
Okay, so perhaps when it comes to asking for reports later on, I could ask for a report on that, Mr. Mayor? Perfect, thank you.
Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, just maybe to move this along to Councillor Harris's point, is there a way we can tie it into this motion here as a friendly direction to staff to connect with Towering Heights homestead ownership to dedicate specific sites for whether it be PSWs? If that would be a friendly amendment, we can add it right into this motion.
Can we open Councillor Harris's mic?
I think you could try to do that. I'm not sure it would be successful, but I don't think there's any harm in reaching out to them, even as ward councillors, to ask if there's a possibility. I'm not sure how successful you'd be, though.
I think we can definitely include it as a direction to staff. Can we open Councillor Townsend's mic?
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, can we please add that in as part of the motion here as well and have council direct staff to do this? Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, seeing none, then I will look to the clerk to call the roll on the motion as amended on the screen.
Councillor Harris.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Councillor Windle.
Yes.
Councillor McPherson.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Ratzlaff.
Yes.
Councillor Stevens.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
Mayor Cisco.
Yes.
That's carried. Unanimous.
So that's so at this time, I will simply say to the folks in the chambers, feel no compunction to hang around. We are going to take a moment or two if anybody would like to leave. I know we have some public meetings and there are some folks, I think, who would like to be able to sit in chamber for the public meetings. You are more than welcome to stay if you would like, but I will give everybody, we'll say 2 minutes if you'd like to pack up. You won't be interrupting anything and we'll allow that to happen. And we're back. So we are at the motion to move consent reports. Before we do that, though, councillors may have noticed that we have an addition on the front bench this evening. I'd like to introduce you to Meredith down on the end there. She is observing the clerk and all of the clerky things that the clerk does. So don't be alarmed. Just letting you know. And welcome, Meredith. So moving on to the motion to move consent reports, we have a motion the council approve the consent agenda, save and accept those items brought forth for discussion. Moving the motion to approve the consent agenda, I have Councillor McPherson, and I will look to the clerk.
Today's consent agenda includes item 6.1, Corporate Support Services Accessibility 2023 Annual Status Report, a multi-year accessibility plan, and item 6.2, Legal and Clerk Services, Office of the City Clerk, correspondence from the St. Catharines Downtown Association regarding the 2025 budget and levy request. Councillor McPherson.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
Councillor Harris.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner. Yes. Councillor Lindell.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Ratzlaff.
Yes.
Councillor Stevens.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
And Mayor Cisco.
Yes.
And that's carried.
Declaration to all presenters. Council chambers in all municipalities in our country represent the seat of local democracy. The many acts that govern us understand the necessity of the collective voice when decisions are being made to grow our spaces, pass our bylaws, and to seek opinions into very complex issues, ensuring safe spaces for all in our public discourse. We recognize the right of the majority to decide, the minority to be heard, the public to have an opportunity to participate, and all participants to be treated with courtesy and respect. It is imperative that elected officials, citizens, and staff have input, and it is paramount that we listen to one another and question one another, but that we understand we do this in a way that never undermines any person's ability or their dignity in our chambers. We respect the right for everyone to have an opinion and remind the audience views of the public do not always reflect those of the corporation of the City of St. Catharines. With that, we move on to our public meetings this evening, and the first one is 7.1, Planning and Building Services, Planning Services Housing Accelerator Fund, City-Initiated Zoning Bylaw Amendment, Affordable Housing Parking Exemption. The purpose of this public meeting is to ensure that sufficient information is available for the public and council to understand the proposed city-initiated zoning bylaw amendment, affordable housing parking exemption, and to provide the public with an opportunity for input before council's decision. If a specified person or public body, as defined in the Planning Act, or the registered owner of the land does not make an oral submission at this public meeting or written submission to council prior to council making its decision, they are not entitled to appeal the decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. If a person does not make an oral submission at the public meeting or written submission prior to the council decision, that person may not be added as a party to the hearing of any appeals by others without the permission of the tribunal. The public meeting will proceed as follows. Staff will explain the report and staff's recommendation. Members of the public who are wishing to delegate were advised to register by 9 a.m. today. No one requested to speak. The deadline to submit written comments was 12 p.m. today, and one written comment was received and published on the January 9th council correspondence list. At that point, I will ask if anyone in attendance wishes to speak. After that, the public meeting will be closed, and council will be able to ask staff questions and will consider the report recommendations. The public meeting is now open, and I'll call upon Taya Devlin, the senior planner, to present.
Thank you, and good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, staff, and everyone joining this public meeting for the zoning bylaw amendment to consider an affordable housing parking exemption. The purpose of the proposed amendment is to exempt affordable residential units from the requirement to provide vehicular and bicycle parking. The parking exemption supports the creation of affordable residential units and adds flexibility for affordable housing providers. In line with the city's high-level goals, the council-approved Housing Accelerator Fund Action Plan included 7 initiatives aimed at overcoming obstacles to build housing. Initiative number 3, inclusive housing, aims to foster a housing environment that prioritizes inclusion and adaptability and encourages construction and reduced development costs for affordable, accessible, and purpose-built rental developments. An affordable housing parking exemption is one of the action items under this initiative. So while there are varied definitions of affordable housing, the amendment proposes to use the definition consistent with the Development Charges Act, which relies upon data provided by the Ministry of Finance. So affordability is determined based on the lesser of the income-based and market-based purchase price for ownership and the lesser of the income-based and market-based rent for a rental unit. The Development Charges Act establishes that as part of securing an exemption from development charges for an affordable unit, the provider would be required to enter into an agreement requiring the unit to be affordable for a period of 25 years. By utilizing this same definition for the parking exemption, the same agreement can be used as adequate demonstration that the residential unit will be provided as an affordable unit and therefore compliant with the zoning bylaw. So the income-based purchase price is determined based on a household at the 60th percentile of the income distribution for all households in the local municipality, and a purchase price that would result in annual accommodation costs equal to 30% of that household's gross annual income. Similarly, for a rental unit, the income-based rent is determined based on a household at the 60th percentile of the income distribution for renter households in the local municipality, and a rent that would result in annual accommodation costs equal to 30% of that household's gross annual income. The market-based purchase price is determined based on a purchase price that is 90% of the average purchase price of a unit of the same unit type in the local municipality. And for rental, the market-based rent is determined based on the average market rent for a unit of that type. For St. Catharines in 2024, the income-based purchase price is the lower amount for all unit types. As such, all unit types, regardless of their dwelling type, are considered affordable where the purchase price is $309,000 or less. In 2024, the market-based rent for St. Catharines is the lesser amount for bachelor, 1-bedroom, and 2-bedroom units, and the income-based rent is the lesser amount for a rental unit with 3 bedrooms or more. So they're considered affordable where the monthly rent is at or below $1,053 for a bachelor unit, $1,338 for a 1-bedroom, $1,522 for 2-bedroom, and $1,620 for 3 bedrooms or more. If we imagine an apartment building that has 50 units and 5 of those units are affordable for either rental or ownership, based on the parking requirements established in the city's zoning bylaw, a total of 63 vehicular parking spaces and 18 bicycle parking spaces would be required. The amendment proposes to exempt those affordable units from parking requirements, which results in a total of 56 vehicular parking spaces and 16 bicycle spaces now being required. On a smaller scale, if we imagine a lot with an existing duplex and 2 parking spaces, as is required by our zoning bylaw, if the owner were considering converting the building to a 4-plex, adding 2 additional units, a total of 4 parking spaces would now be required. However, should this amendment be passed, if the owner commits to providing those 2 new units as affordable units, then no new parking spaces would be required. If approved, this amendment would prioritize affordable housing units over parking spaces, remove the provision of parking as a potential barrier to affordable residential units, and establish alternative requirements to support an increase in the supply of affordable housing. The proposed amendment was circulated to the appropriate departments and agencies, and notice of the public meeting was published in the St. Catharines Standard on December 20th. Materials and information regarding the proposed amendment were made available through a dedicated project website, which included an informational video which has been viewed over 20 times to date, and 1 letter of comment has been received. The proposed amendment supports the provision of a full range of housing options, increasing the supply of affordable housing, establishment of alternative requirements to support the provision of affordable housing, and support for the city's target of 30% of all new housing units as affordable units. The planning framework in Ontario functions in a hierarchy of policy documents. The policy documents from the province, region, and city official plan all inform the city's zoning bylaw. The proposed amendment is consistent with the provincial policy and conforms to and does not conflict with the Niagara official plan and City of St. Catharines official plan. In conclusion, it is staff's recommendation that council approve the proposed zoning bylaw amendment to establish a parking exemption for affordable residential units. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Devlin. At this time, as mentioned, nobody has registered to speak on this item. Is there anybody in attendance who wishes to speak? All right, seeing none, can I have a motion to close the public meeting? Councillor Harris, Councillor Dodge, all those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. The public meeting is now closed and council is called to order. Persons wishing to receive notice of council's decision should submit a written request to the office of the city clerk. Is there a councillor who would like to move the recommendation in this report? Councillor McPherson, Councillor Ratzlaff. At this time, does anybody have any questions to staff or comments to make? Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, it's kind of appropriate that we're dealing with this after we just had the Towering Heights issue where parking was the key concern. It was also mentioned about service providers coming into, particularly in multi-unit developments. Anyway, my main question is this: is if this is a total exemption, does it take away any ability for us to say that no, you're going to need to provide some parking in this unique set of circumstances, or is this an all as of right where the developer's automatically allowed to have not provide any parking?
Through the mayor to the councillor, the exemption would apply only to those units that the provider would demonstrate are going to be provided as affordable units, so not solely any unit they're going to provide on that site. They have to demonstrate affordability for specific units. And it essentially just removes the city's requirement that they have to provide parking at our ratios. They can still choose based on the market and based on knowing their clientele what parking is appropriate for their site and then provide that. It's just that our zoning requirement wouldn't be the barrier that kind of delays them getting approvals.
Thank you. So effectively it is as of right, the developer, the property real estate person can do what they choose to do. So how do we address the situation where okay, the other situation is if these affordable units don't stay affordable, what happens in that case?
So through the mayor to the council, there's going to be a couple steps to this. So if the unit loses its affordability, number one, it's now no longer compliant with zoning. So the options would be to update their site to comply with zoning, or then they'd have to go through a process to amend the zoning bylaw to recognize the parking situation on site. But before we even get to that, the definition we've proposed to use, consistent with the Development Charges Act, requires that they enter into an agreement solidifying those units as affordable for the 25 years. And there's work ongoing right now to develop those agreements, and within that there will be sort of the steps and processes of what happens if it loses its affordability. So we would be notified through that process and it would be outlined.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just to follow on to that question, would it be possible to build penalties into any of those agreements so that if they violated the affordability, there would be a financial damage awarded?
Through the mayor to the councillor, it would be a bylaw issue, like any other bylaw issue as far as an enforcement. So I don't believe we have amps right now for bylaw issue, for zoning bylaw infractions, but there are fines that can go with it.
So we could add a fine into that agreement if they violated the affordability?
I believe so.
Okay, wonderful. Well, that's something we should definitely consider. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am supportive of this. I guess the question I have, just for folks who are watching, is what is the cost of an average parking spot?
Through the mayor to the councillor, the discussion at one of the conferences from last year was that it ran from about $70,000 to $100,000 for underground parking spaces.
Okay. So, I mean, us being able to move forward with this would eliminate that cost and would make it more effective or more affordable just with that alone.
Through the mayor to the councillor, yes. And it might be kind of that tipping point for a developer to decide to add affordable units to their market-based building, right? So they might be putting in 100 units and knowing, okay, well, if we make 10 of those affordable, you have a huge decrease in your parking construction costs.
Okay. And currently, is there, with CMHC mortgages, is there a benefit that developers are receiving or getting right now that is available for affordable units?
Through the mayor to the councillor, yes. And it's definitely one of the eligibility criteria for a lot of their programs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question to staff. I kind of agree with Councillor Williamson. So if somebody like Regional Housing or something was building a whole building of affordable housing, they could, in a sense, then not have any parking spots. That's what we're going to tell them. Because this way here was just allowing for units within a development to give us affordable housing. Like 50 units was the example, and I'm going to give 5, so that's 5 less spots. So if I'm making a 100-unit development that's all affordable, I don't have to provide any parking, 0. That's what this, is that my understanding?
Through the mayor to the councillor, that's correct. If a building was 100% comprised of affordable units, the city's zoning bylaw would not require that they provide any parking. However, again, that provider could choose to, and likely would, based on market needs, provide some form of parking on a site.
Right, but, you know, like they've been saying, like the cost and everything, they wouldn't want to do that, and if it's affordable. So we just had the issue with the parking just before this, like Councilor Williamson said, so there's a parking issue. So if we had a full building and they didn't have to allow any parking, that's going to be a nightmare for wherever that's built. And there's no parking for any PSWs or anything like that. So I definitely don't like the way this is, the way it is right now. I think we can allow staff to amend the parking instead of having the developers go to the Committee of Adjustment and spend $2,500 or whatever the cost is now to ask for a variance. I feel that can be done at the staff level, but to give a blanket to say you don't have to, I don't think that, I think that's a nightmare.
I will just jump in for a moment, being as I sit on the board of Niagara Regional Housing. It would be outside of the realm of possibility that an affordable housing development through NRH would be proposed without parking. It should also be noted, the vast majority, I mean, really where this is going to be applicable would be in the higher density builds that have underground parking. Niagara Regional Housing doesn't engage in that because they can't afford it in the first place. For the most part, you're going to see surface parking, which is recognized as necessary. This is viewed, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, as an incentive and an enticement to private sector developers who right now are not building any affordable housing or very, very little affordable housing to come on board with a lower price point so they can build affordable housing. And I'll use as a real world example, $309,000 was listed as that affordable line for purchase. There's a development in the west end of the city right now that if it wasn't required to have, say, an $85,000, we'll split the difference, $85,000 underground parking space, they're offering relatively large condo sizes. If they were to reduce the size of that footprint and put additional units within the building, which would be allowed under their zoning, with the lack of housing, or sorry, the lack of parking, those units that are currently retailing at a certain market price would fall below that $309,000. Now, I'll tell you right now, there's not a single, staff can correct me if I'm wrong, not a single new build in the city right now that's going for less than $309,000 a unit. But that particular development could if they didn't have the requirement of underground parking for that unit. So this would be an incentive that could actually drive the per unit price down below $309,000. I don't expect the uptake to be massive, but we have a goal of 30% affordable housing, something to keep in mind as councillors are debating this particular motion. With that, Councillor Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with this in principle, but I think there are more details that have to be worked out. For example, Councillor Williamson indicated what happens if the units are converted to non-affordable, and the answer was, well, they could remedy this by putting parking on site. But if the builder builds for non-affordable, for affordable, they would use the maximum space available. And therefore, if they didn't comply later, I don't think there would be any room for them to put in parking because they've already used the maximum for building. And secondly, I don't like the idea of this being allowed in every area in the city. You can imagine if in one of your residential areas there's a proposal for intensification, then you would probably agree to it. But if there's intensification and no parking, that would put a lot of hardship on the neighboring residential units. And therefore, I think this has to be confined to certain areas of the city. And years ago, we did the same thing. For businesses in the downtown, we waived the parking requirement to encourage them to build in the downtown. And I think we did the same thing in Port Dalhousie. So what I would like to see is this be restricted to certain areas of the city, like the downtown, like arterial streets, etc. And I'd be prepared to make an amendment to that effect or have it referred back to staff for comment on that suggestion.
You can't make a referral because you have spoken to it. That is open to others. If you are proposing an amendment, I would look to Councillor McPherson. No, so that's not friendly. Do you want to place that amendment on the floor now, Councillor Kushner, or do you want to let the debate go on and then see if it's...
Yes, I would make the amendment now.
Okay.
That the exemption be in certain areas of the city only, be restricted to certain areas, and that staff determine which areas that would be.
Okay, so there is an amendment on the floor that the exemption be limited to, or restricted to certain areas of the city, and that staff report back on those areas of exemption. So I will clear the queue. And all those wishing to speak to the amendment. Councillor Miller.
Just could staff respond now to that idea? I know it's asked in a report, but just initial comments.
Through the mayor to the councillor. So the idea is to encourage affordable housing throughout the city and not to limit it to certain areas. We already don't have parking requirements in our downtown, so that restriction has already been removed. Most of the developments coming in still do provide parking, because like Ted kind of explained, the idea is not to say there will be no parking, it's just that they will dictate kind of what works for them. I would also note that our year one reporting for the Housing Accelerator Fund is due at the beginning of February, so we would not be able to get this back in time for that year one reporting.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments with respect to the amendment? All right, seeing none, I will look to the clerk to call the roll in a moment. I will simply say I will be opposed to this particular amendment. I think there's value in this across the city, and the reality is you don't want to restrict or only incentivize affordable housing in certain areas. This is something that this council has talked a lot about over the last 9 years, is that, you know, it's not good to have blocks of affordable housing in certain areas of the city. That leads to a lot of other issues. Small amounts of affordable housing across the city, and a more inclusive view of how those units are built out in the city is what makes the most sense. So I would encourage my colleagues to vote against the amendment, but with that, I will look to the clerk to call the roll on this amendment.
Councillor Kushner?
Yes.
Councillor Dodge?
Yes.
Councillor Harris?
No.
Councillor Lindell?
No.
Councillor McPherson?
No.
Councillor Miller?
No.
Councillor Phillips?
Yes.
Councillor Ratzlaff?
No.
Councillor Stevens?
No.
Councillor Townsend?
No.
Councillor Williamson?
No.
Mayor Cisco?
No.
That is lost.
So, Councillor Kushner, you do still have the floor if you want to add any additional comments. If I could just ask us to open up Councillor Kushner's mic. And then before you speak. Before you go, can I ask Councillor Townsend to jump in, and then Councillor Ratzlaff, and then Councillor Dodge. And thank you, Councillor Williamson, I appreciate that. Okay, so can we open up, or I'll open up Councillor Kushner's mic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I made a mistake when I made the amendment. I should have said restricted to certain areas such as arterial roads. And we have miles of arterial roads, and we wouldn't have any type of density ghetto in those things.
Thanks, you, Councillor Kushner. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I certainly am all about and support affordable housing units. I do have some concerns, though, with these providing the parking exemptions. And my big concern is similar to what Councillor Williamson had brought up is how do you enforce this? The builder builds, turns into a fourplex and gets an exemption for 2 units, for 2 parking spaces, and then say that over the next 2-3 years, the rent gets jacked up. How do you go back and enforce it? And it's not like the rent is made public, especially if a person is living in the unit for several years. So through you to staff, if you can comment on that, because I don't believe it's physically possible to get those details.
Through the mayor to the councillor. So with using the same definition as the Development Charges Act and relying on that agreement, entering or for them confirming affordability for 25 years, that's sort of our review item to confirm that zoning compliance at time of permit issuance. So if they fail to comply with that agreement, then they also then have to pay their development charges. So there's a bunch of things that will trigger if they lose it that will de-incentivize that loss. So the development charges get charged and we get notified, and then it's the enforcement issue of the zoning bylaw. So like we said, I know that there's speculation that the properties would be built out to the limits, but we do have setbacks from front property lines, so there would be room, presumably on lots of properties, to provide parking after the fact if it was required.
And thank you, staff, for that. Through you, Mr. Mayor, again to staff, to understand this, staff would be relying on the tenant to essentially inform the city of what they're paying in rent.
Through the mayor to the councillor, so there would be certain reporting requirements that would go along with a lot of the DC agreements that would go for the affordable pieces, as well as something similar for rental housing. So every year you would have to provide the rents or some sort of information on, if it's whether it's rental or purchase in this case, on what that affordable amount is. And if it wasn't, then the financial piece comes in.
Thank you for that. Mr. Mayor, through you to staff, the reporting then would include the owner of the property, the landlord, to report back on what they're charging the tenant?
Through the mayor, correct.
Thank you. I'll just say I'm not in favor of this. I think there's a lot of holes in this. I think we have to really be more clear on the enforcing aspect of it, and I won't be supporting this for those reasons, Mr. Mayor, unless one of the councillors could refer it back and ask for staff to come back with a more clearer vision to council as to how the enforcement would happen. Would be happy. This doesn't seem like it's enforceable, and I just see it as a loophole for those to build units without.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Through you. Every time that we have a development come to council, almost land speculators, it's full of luxury condos or luxury rentals, building affordable units in our city. We had a report come out last Wednesday from AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. It was a report on homelessness in the province, and it was pretty concerning. 80,000 individuals are experiencing homelessness in Ontario. Over half of them, for the first time in our province's history, are chronically homeless. And it really called for every level of government to work together to address the housing crisis in the province, but specifically our cities. This is something that we can do that doesn't cost us any money, and it incentivizes and encourages affordable housing. We're removing a barrier to build affordable housing in our city. And I think that in our current climate, that's something that we all have to take really seriously. So, my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Ratzlaff. Councillor Dodge.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions. So we're talking about 30% of the buildings possibly where they would be exempt of not having parking. Where are the 30% going to start parking? Because we're hearing a lot of people saying, and this has actually happened in Grantham, where we've had infill and they've built it and then they built it out again and then they had parking exemptions and now they have overflow parking onto, we don't have anywhere to put them, but people are just kind of scrambling around and, you know, jockeying for spots and stuff like that. So how will this be prevented from happening and where will this 30% go? Because, you know, because it's affordable doesn't mean that they're not going to have a car or something that they need to put it somewhere.
Through the mayor to the councillor. So the 30% is our goal for affordable housing from our official plan. Unfortunately, we don't come near that goal annually. If we did, we probably wouldn't be in a housing crisis in the city, so it'd be very good news. The idea is that the providers will know what they need. So the 1.25, if you're building affordable housing, and let's say it's a housing provider, it doesn't have to be NRH. They understand based on the other buildings that they have that they only need maybe 0.7 or 0.8 parking spaces per unit, because historically that's how the tenants of their units, how many have had cars in comparison to how many haven't. So instead of building that extra parking and making it cost more, they can now move forward with their development with the 0.7 or the 0.8. So it's not necessarily saying, you know, that entire building won't have it. Where do you then accommodate? It's also accommodating for the fact that there is a reality that there are people that will live without the cars, and building as many of those units as possible while also having the option for people that do want parking.
Okay. Well, I'm hearing different things from people, even from the downtown core, where people are not able to park downtown because there's no parking for them, sort of thing. And I think that it's something that's happening that we're just, I don't know whether it's fair to say we're ignoring it, but I think that it's happening and it's only going to get worse, I think. And then I have another question as well. So if a property's built and they have this exemption of the parking and whatnot, does the new purchaser have to follow that, or what happens in that situation?
Through the mayor to the councillor, yes. So it would be pretty much baked into the zoning for that property, so it wouldn't matter who owned the property or if it changed hands.
Okay, and so who would enforce that?
We would.
We would? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dodge. Councillor Harris.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the, well, first of all, it seems like everybody has an issue with the enforcement here. So I'm wondering if we could approve this in principle and perhaps direct staff to come back with how they're going to enforce it, what the fines are going to be, and what that actually looks like. Because I guess you have some reporting concerns. It has to go in on February 1st. Is that what you said? I guess, sorry, through the mayor to the manager of planning services.
Through the mayor. Yes, so we have our year one reporting due at the beginning of February, and this is one of the action items. And yes, we could come back with details on enforcement.
So we could approve this in principle on the condition that you return back with an enforcement policy. I'm not sure who talks about bylaw here, because I don't see any
Legal?
bylaw people here, or maybe, or is the chief building, or no, it's the legal?
Legal.
Okay, maybe I'll direct through the mayor to the assistant city solicitor. What are the chances you can come back as soon as possible with some sort of plan to enforce?
Through the chair to the councillor, I don't imagine it would take incredibly long. You know, I think it would probably mimic what's going on with the Development Charges Act, the Affordable Attainable Units under that act, which is mentioned in the report, right? And that, you know, that's enforced through something called an affordability period and an agreement that's essentially registered on title. So, you know, I don't see that we're sort of proposing, you know, that kind of agreement here. We're sort of relying on the agreement that's going to be done under the Development Charges Act. But I would think that would be an option, you know, for the actual zoning incentive here. So to answer your question, I don't think it would take incredibly long.
Okay, so through the mayor, I guess I'll ask the mayor, could we approve this and do a direction to staff, and could we actually get a date instead of?
So I'm just going to look to the mover and the seconder. Would a friendly amendment be that staff return back with enforcement mechanisms for the approval of council?
I can't read that.
Not direction to staff, it would be an additional clause in the motion. Put it before the further that.
Like we're approving it and it's coming back.
Yeah,
with that.
that staff report back with enforcement mechanisms.
First deal with.
Can I ask, looking to Mr. DeLallo, what would be an appropriate timeline to have those enforcement mechanisms back? Given that it's mimicking things that already exist, would this first or second meeting in February be appropriate? I have a lot of faith in your ability to write quickly.
That sounds reasonable to me.
Okay, so the first or second meeting in February, is that timeline?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I try. So that is, just to the mover and the seconder, that is friendly? It is? Okay. I have Councillor Williamson, but I have Councillor Phillips hasn't spoken yet, and Councillor Williamson has led off the speaking.
Or some kind of financial penalty fine, which I think is what Councillor Harris is talking about here.
believe
So
so,
I don't
yeah.
know if we need to amend that, but to address the issue of affordable units when they begin, get converted to non-affordable units. There's got to be a significant disincentive for them to do that.
Sorry, I would suggest that perhaps that might be an additional report request that we make tonight to ask about the disincentivization of affordable units being converted in general, because there are a number of pieces. It's been mentioned the development charges. There are exemptions on development charges for affordable units. I think it's important for council to know what our enforcement mechanisms are across the suite of incentives we offer for affordability. So I would suggest, Councillor, let's make that a staff report at the end.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Williamson. Councillor Phillips.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Presently, we have two large buildings in the city that are affordable housing. Well, I don't know if you call it affordable. The building on Carlton and the one over here on Church. They have parking lots, correct? How many spaces do you know how many spaces they have? Or how many are used? Are they used? To me, I have real concerns that we could build a building, as Councillor Stevens said, that somebody could build a building and have 0 parking spots, and then all of a sudden the people who do have cars are going to be parking on the streets, wherever that might be. Do you know these two buildings in particular that I mentioned, the size of their lots, and are their lots being used?
Through the mayor to the councillor, not offhand, it's something we can look up pretty easily right now. Just to note, on Church Street, that one is within the downtown parking exemption already.
Right.
Offhand, I know that I haven't heard complaints for the two buildings on parking issues, but we can look up, if you can give us a minute, we can look up what their actual parking count is.
Okay. I also have concerns with this, and as was mentioned, it's interesting, we had a parking issue tonight that we successfully dealt with, but I still don't like having cars parked on the street for various reasons. I think we should have, if it's an affordable housing situation, a large building, I think we should have a minimum. It wouldn't have to be 1.25, maybe not even 0.75, but I think there should be a minimum depending on the size of the building and where it is located possibly. Because if a unit's going to be $309,000, $310,000, I don't see necessarily this is a homeless issue, because I don't know how many people who are presently homeless could get mortgages and get into a house that's $309,000, but I do see it's an opportunity for young couples to be able to afford a house and to get themselves started. And in that case, they would need I know a lot of people are saying they'd be on the bus, but they also might need a car. And so I see the $310,000 units being occupied more by young couples getting into the market and perhaps needing a car to get to work. And I do think that we should have a minimum of 0.75 per unit or 0.7. You're the experts on that one. But I have a concern right now with it being 0. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I will point out the experts on this one also recommended 0. I'm just saying. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know we're all worried about parking, and certainly I know that Councillor Ratzlaff and I are regularly talking about parking in the downtown. The fact that there is actually quite a bit of it, but people seem to think there isn't any. But I guess my comment is, and well, there's a question in there too. What's the average development time for a large development? You know, we're talking about intensification, but what's the average time that it takes to, you know, from a developer coming to the city saying, I would like to build X, to it actually being filled with people?
Through the mayor to the councillor, probably 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
I'm just going to jump in, actually. I'll use Mr. Adelick's building over here because I was in the first meeting with Nick, and I'm going to jump into the Wayback Machine. Councillor Mark Elliott and Director of Planning Jim Riddle, and that was 11 years ago.
Okay.
And the building, I believe, is starting to be populated on the bottom floors. The lights are on anyways. It looks beautiful at night.
So to that, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think to that is that we have to keep in mind that we are talking about not tomorrow, that, you know, magically we're not going to get like an 8 or a 9 or a 10 or a 15-story building anywhere in the city tomorrow, but that it will take time. And as our very capable transit commissioners from the city of St. Catharines are regularly working to have better and more transit and more effective transit. And then we have, you know, the promise of GO, we have the promise of lots of transit that we're not talking about today. We are talking 5 and 10 years down the road. So I think that's, yes, we are a car city. No one is ever going to get rid of the car, but the reality is that things are also changing, that there are lots of young people who are choosing to not purchase cars because right now the cost of a car for many people is about 1/3 of their annual income, which for many people is very expensive. That's very expensive for lots of people. People are cutting back on the number of cars they're purchasing. So I think when we're talking about this, we are making the plans for the future. So I think, yes, we have every reason to be concerned about parking, but also 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as we know, things change pretty quickly in this crazy world we live in. So we're planning for 5 and 10 years down the road. So I think that's something really important to keep in mind when it comes to these affordable units, which I can tell you as someone who has a friend who's looking for a house right now, who is very, you know, is an average person, they would be thrilled to have a unit that was around around 309,000, regardless of whether it had a parking spot or not. So just keep thinking of the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Seeing no, Councillor Kushner.
Question of clarification, Mr. Mayor. Does this mean there'd be no parking for visitors?
No, it doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now seeing no questions, I will just provide a little bit of comment. I appreciate the back and forth. I will say to Councillor Harris, I appreciate the amendment that was made there. I think that it's important for us, if we pass this, to see those enforcement mechanisms. And I would strongly encourage my colleagues to vote in favor of this amendment, in favor of this motion. The reality is we provide a number of financial incentives and incentives in general around the feasibility of building affordable housing. It's very difficult to get private developers to build affordable housing. I hear a lot of concern about Niagara regional housing and these buildings of affordable housing units, and there'd be no parking. That's fundamentally untrue. That doesn't make any sense. Niagara regional housing wouldn't engage in that. for the same reason that private sector developers wouldn't engage in that. We've had parking exemptions in the downtown for, I'm looking to staff, 20 years?
About, yeah.
20 years. Mr. Adelic had the opportunity to build a building with zero parking. He did not choose to do that. It would have drastically lowered his costs. He did not choose to do that. He did not choose to do that because it made absolutely no sense from a viability of the product standpoint. I've had multiple meetings over the last couple of weeks, well, say the last 2 months, with a couple of different developers who have projects planned in the city. One who is currently building has another project on the way. And they were very clear that they know what the market demands in St. Catharines. It's different from what the market demands in Toronto or Milton. They aren't building for those markets, they're building for this market. And they recognize that parking is a requirement. I don't believe a developer is going to go forward with zero parking because that's an unsaleable project. They're not going to find people to take those units. They're not going to buy the condo. They're not going to rent the apartment because they need somewhere to put their car. Having right now really comes down to prioritizing the possibility of who are least able to afford it within our community. Spaces are going to say the first priority is somewhere to live because they can charge a premium for that appropriate parking where it exists. And I know from being on the board of NRH, we would not put forward a development that doesn't meet. Strongly encourage my colleagues, especially with the amendment that's been brought forward, because I do think that will address a lot of the concerns. I would strongly encourage my colleagues to vote in favor of this amendment.
Councillor McPherson.
Yes.
Yes.
Councillor Stevens.
No.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
Councillor Harris.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Councillor Lindell.
Yes.
And Mayor Cisco.
Yes.
That's carried.
Official plan, subject lands 226 Lockhart Drive, owner John Buffalino. At this time, before we get into the public meeting, I would like to remind members of the public, we do have a number of presenters today. There is the amendment to the official plan. The purpose of this public meeting is to ensure that sufficient information is available for the public and council to understand the proposed recommendation report for an application to amend the official plan, subject lands 226 Lockhart Drive, and to provide the public with an opportunity for input before meeting or written submission to council prior to council making its decision. They are not entitled to appeal the decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. If a person does not make an oral submission at the public meeting or a written submission prior to the council decision, that person may not be added as a party to the hearing of any event will present, and council will have an opportunity to ask questions of the agent at that time. Members of the public wishing to delegate were advised to register by 9 listing. At that time, I will ask, after the 4 registered delegates have spoken, if anybody else wishes to speak. After that, the public meeting will be closed, and then council will be able to ask staff questions and will consider the report recommendations. The public meeting is now.
Good evening, Mayor Cisco, council members, and everyone who has joined this public meeting. I will be presenting planning's regular shaped parcel located on the corner of Lockhart Drive and Glenridge Avenue, by a 2-story place of worship. The surrounding neighborhood is largely residential with low-density detached dwellings to the immediate south. Multi-residential uses exist further to the north of the subject lands, and Brock and a variety of other uses exist further to the south on Glenridge Avenue. The purpose of the official plan application is to redesignate a portion of the lands from low-density residential to medium-density residential to facilitate the development of an apartment building use on the subject lands. There are no changes proposed to the portion of the lands, subject lands that are currently designated as natural areas, and staff will note that due to the subject lands location within the Niagara Escarpment Plan area, the city's zoning bylaw is not in effect, and is why a zoning bylaw amendment was not required and does not accompany this application. As mentioned, as the lands are within the Niagara Escarpment Commission Development Control Area, a development permit approved by the Niagara Escarpment Commission is required in addition to city planning applications. Applications for official plan amendment, site plan approval, and the development permit were concurrently applied for in February 2023. Because the Niagara Escarpment Plan is a provincial document, it supersedes regional and local planning policies, and as such, a decision had to be made on the required development of October 2024. The applicants initially submitted a proposal for a 5-story apartment building with 22 dwelling units with 26 parking spaces. However, the applicants revised their proposal, and a 4-story apartment building with the same number of dwelling units is now proposed. The applicants also increased the number of parking spaces to 29 spaces. The site plan did not significantly change between the initial submission and revised submission, other than the inclusion of the additional parking spaces. The bulk of the parking spaces will be accommodated within the main floor of the building. As can be seen on the site plan, development will take place entirely on the front half of the property where the place of worship and paved area exist. The rear portion of the land, which comprises the escarpment area shown in green, will not be developed. Additionally, a 5-meter buffer from the extent of natural area is required and has been provided to provide enhanced protection from the natural area and meets provincial and regional policy as outlined in the slide. In addition to being within the NEC's area of development control, the subject lands also have a dual designation within the Niagara Escarpment Plan, with the front half being designated urban area and the rear portion being escarpment natural area. Development is permitted in urban areas, subject to approval, an approved NEC development permit. The NEC has conditionally approved the applicant's development permit for development on the urban area designated portion of the lands. As such, the proposal meets and conforms to the Niagara Escarpment Plan policies. Some of these conditions include required implementation of the recommendations made by the environmental impact study, implementing the submitted vegetation and tree protection plan, and including bird-friendly glass and neutral earth-toned building cladding materials for the final development. Under the city's official plan, the current designation for the subject lands is low-density residential at the front half of the property, and the rear half is designated natural areas. Apartment buildings are not typically permitted in the low-density residential designation. The applicants are proposing to redesignate only the portion of the lands that are currently designated low-density residential to medium-density residential. The medium-density residential designation permits apartment buildings, which would permit the proposed development. The natural areas designated portion of the lands will remain unchanged. Staff have reviewed the proposal against official plan policies. The subject lands are underutilized lands located on a regional arterial road that are serviced by existing municipal infrastructure and frequent transit. As such, staff are satisfied that the proposal conforms to the intent of the plan. The OPA application was circulated to both external agencies and city departments for review. No objections were received for the proposed amendment. Some comments were received from staff that will be addressed at the site plan approval stage. An open house to present the proposal to the public was held virtually in April 2023. Comments from the public have also been received in response to the notice of public meeting. The feedback is addressed more thoroughly within the recommendation report. However, I will just quickly go over them. The lands are inappropriate in regards to concerns of compatibility of use and height. The lands are an appropriate location for infill development of a low-rise apartment building, as they are located on a regional arterial road on the exterior of a neighborhood that is serviced by regular public transit and existing municipal services. Following the public open house, the applicant revised the proposal from an initial 5-story building to 4 stories, and staff are of the opinion that sufficient setbacks have been provided considering the proposed height of approximately 14.5 meters. In regards to concerns over traffic, street parking, and sightlines at the intersection, a traffic brief was submitted as part of this application. The city's transportation staff and regional traffic staff were not concerned with the findings of the submitted traffic brief and were satisfied that the proposed development maintains a visibility triangle at the corner of Lockhart and Glenridge. Concerns regarding impact on Niagara Escarpment environment and views. No development is proposed on the escarpment lands. An environmental impact study was required to ensure that the proposal will not impact any natural features. Both the Escarpment Commission and Region found the EIS satisfactory with no concerns about negative impacts, provided the EIS recommendations are followed. The NEC has made these recommendations a condition of the development permit. Additionally, a visual impact assessment was conducted, and the Escarpment Commission issued conditional approval, finding no concerns regarding visual impacts on the escarpment. There were concerns received that the development will be for the purpose of student housing, and in regards to this, the applicant has not identified a target market for the development. However, the city cannot regulate the demographic of who lives within a particular development. So in summary, staff are of the opinion that the 4-story, 22-unit apartment building proposed is an appropriate development that respects the views to the Niagara Escarpment and maintains the integrity of the environmental features. In conclusion, staff recommends that council approve the requested official plan amendment to redesignate a portion of the lands from low density to medium density residential. The proposal is consistent with the Provincial Planning Statement 2024, and the proposal conforms to the Niagara Regional Official Plan and the Garden City Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Furco. At this time, I will now call upon Tom Richardson, lawyer with Sullivan Manny, and Stephen Bedford, the principal planner of Landex Developments Limited. Gentlemen, the lectern is yours.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Tom Richardson. I'm a senior counsel with the law firm of Sullivan Manny at 40 Queen Street in St. Catharines. With me is Mr. Stephen Bedford, principal planner with the firm Landex Developments Limited. We appear this evening on behalf of a numbered company, the owner of the lands located at 226 Lockhart Drive in St. Catharines. Thank you for permitting us to make this joint presentation. You've heard from the city planner recommending in favor of the official plan amendment. As pointed out by staff, the Niagara Escarpment Commission has also undertaken a planning review of this project and has determined to approve it under its powers of development control, subject to this amendment to the official plan. With your permission, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Bedford will provide our planning analysis, following which I would propose to round out our submission after Mr. Bedford, if that's permitted. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, councillors, and residents who have come here this evening, thank you very much for hearing us this evening. The staff have done an excellent job in outlining the policies in the official plan and how this particular development meets those major policies. I will move quickly through the policy section and deal with the concerns that we've heard from the residents in order to give you some comfort that we as the owner has taken steps to ensure this development will be as compatible as possible, given introducing an apartment building on the edge of a residential neighborhood. As you can see on the air photograph, there's a lot of asphalt on this site. What's interesting is we're building an apartment building and in fact reducing the asphalt on the site. The lands behind, the pavement behind the church that's shown on the site will be part of the buffer zone and will be planted with natural plant materials to provide a buffer to the woodland to the south. The escarpment lands will be untouched, and as a result, the drainage from the escarpment towards Lockhart into the rear yards of the existing dwellings will not change. And you can see here the building and the red line on the overhead. That is a fence to protect the woodland from the development and the residents of the neighborhood and the subject property. You've seen these slides before. The building was reduced in height in order to respond to the concern of the neighbors with height and overlook. And the facilities on the 5th floor were going to be for amenity space and would result in some view over the residential area. And as a result, the overlook has been reduced by lowering the building. And the colors and the windows are going to be part of the site plan agreement. You've heard about the concern of the Niagara Escarpment Commission with respect to the colors of the building, so that they would be muted in order to respond to the background of the escarpment. So our proposed residential development, you have heard in detail from the planner as to what is being proposed. 4 stories, 22 units with 29 parking spaces and a density of 65 units per hectare. That's a quirk of the official plan. If the whole property were used to calculate the density of this particular apartment building, the density would be 32 units per hectare, not 65 units per hectare. The zoning matrix that you see here is the zoning for an R3 zone, which would be an appropriate zone for a building of this nature. And you can see the building has been designed to meet all of the requirements of the R3 zone. The height, the setbacks, particularly setback to the west, where there is an adjacent single detached dwelling. So clearly the planning staff have indicated how the development meets the Planning Act, the Provincial Planning Statement, and the Niagara Escarpment Plan. You can see the array of studies that the developer has prepared and which have been reviewed by the Escarpment Commission, and this information has also been reviewed by the city in order to achieve a development permit for the development as it presently is being proposed. This site meets all of the requirements from an official plan perspective for a multiple residential development. It's on the edge of a single family dwelling. It's on an arterial road. It gets regular transit. It is just north of a hospital complex and a employment area and the university. You can see in the Glendale area, the parks, the churches, the Penn Center with all its uses, the commercial uses north of Glen Morris, all accessible to this new residential development. We did hear neighborhood concerns, and we wanted to speak to those this evening. As you've heard from the planner, the escarpment lands are protected. There's a 5-meter buffer that is going to be planted in natural materials and will be fenced so that the natural area of the escarpment is protected. We've paid particular attention to the landscaping on this property. You can see to the south of the building, the red line with the fence. The lands to the south are not being touched. The buffer area between the building and the fence is being planted with natural materials. Along Glen Ridge Avenue, the plant material that is on the edge of the road will be maintained and reinforced with natural materials. And the plant material along the western boundary, abutting the existing single-family home, you can see significant effort has been made to ensure that the home that is there now and in the future, the neighborhood will be buffered by the significant plant material and the fence that will be constructed. There may be some concern with overlook of a 3-story, 4-story building. What you see here, you can see the balcony that would be on the residential units, and you can see where the rear of the dwelling is. So to the south of that dwelling are units that might have some overlook into the rear yards as you look along the escarpment. Mind you, there are so many trees there, I don't know what you'll be able to see in the summertime. But what you can see here is the layout of the units. And you can see that there are only 2 units, 2 of 22, a couple of floors, the minimal overlook into the rear yards of the houses to the west. Now you can see here the driveway location, sufficient distance from the corner. You can see the 29-meter distance. The driveway, even though it's a second location to provide one-way circular access in and out of the building meets the technical requirements from a traffic perspective. There's been a lot of concern about this intersection. We did have our traffic engineer review the intersection, and you can see here a car from the corner the proposed building is not impacting the view up Glenridge Avenue. The vegetation that's there now will continue to be there. That is, if anything, what a driver will see as he turns or looks at the intersection. There's going to be no change to the situation as it presently exists. There was concern about traffic accidents. We did research traffic accidents, and there were 2 over the last 5 years. There were single motor vehicle accidents. There were not collisions at the corner. Our traffic engineer has been reinforced by the city. The intersection at the corner of Lockhart and Glenridge is a functional and safe intersection. We wanted to deal with the concerns of the neighbors, tried to illustrate how the owner has responded from a design perspective and the issues that were raised at the open house. We hope you find some comfort in the steps that have been taken, and we do ask that Council recommend approval of this particular official plan amendment.
Right, thank you, gentlemen. To Council, are there any questions for the presenter? Now is your opportunity to ask questions of the representatives. Councillor Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You indicated that the proposal is in conformity with provincial requirements, et cetera. Now, what about the compatibility with the neighborhood?
One of the issues in the PPS is the requirement to be compatible with the neighborhood. And in fact, this building will be compatible. It's on the edge of the neighborhood. It is 14 meters high. The normal requirement, it very closely matches the height limits that are already in a single-family residential area. It is providing a strong buffer with the only single-family house next door. The property is, in the future, will be compatible with the neighborhood.
I'm sorry, you're saying in the future it will be compatible?
It's constructed.
Okay, the neighbors have a different opinion, so it's unfortunate that we don't have a design review panel, which we had before, to determine the compatibility with the neighborhood. But that's another issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kushner. Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to the presenter. You made reference to the color scheme as well as the windows. At our house, we have some windows, and birds would be flying into them, so we put some stickers on, which is probably not the best way to address that issue. Are you doing anything with the fenestration to ensure that, and there's going to be lots of birds in the natural area there, or something being done to prevent bird loss crashing into windows?
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Mr. Mayor. The requirements of the Niagara Escarpment Commission are, in fact, that the windows and color of the building be approved by the Niagara Escarpment Commission, and the staff will be implementing them through both the development permit process and the site plan agreement process. So yes, the detailing of the colors of the building and the way the windows are implemented will be approved by the Escarpment Commission.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dodge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the presenters. Just a clarification. Right now, the green space is going to stay the green space due to what the Escarpment Commission, is that in perpetuity, or is there a possibility at some point in time that that could change?
Through you, Mr. Mayor and Council, the Niagara Escarpment Commission designation of escarpment land will be permanent unless the provincial government has something to say. It will be a permanent designation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Prior to discussing the report, we will now hear delegations from the residents who have registered. At this time, I would like to call upon William Neville to speak. Mr. Neville, the lectern is yours.
Thank you very much. Mayor Cisco and members of council, I'll be examining one aspect of the developer's submission this evening, and that's the traffic studies that have already been alluded to. Two observations before I get to those reports. One, the developer must establish that the quality of life in our neighborhood will be preserved and fostered, or, at a very minimum, not harmed by the development if it proceeds. Secondly, I have to refer to a phenomenon in the gathering of statistics called sample collection bias. What's that mean? It's a method of data collection that's frowned upon by those who specialize in the integrity of proper data gathering. So one type of sample collection bias is where you take a small, unrepresentative sample of data and then extrapolate to general findings, all to get to a preordained conclusion. So I ask you to keep that in mind when you refer to the two Anderson reports, which are the traffic studies. There are two. You've just heard the collision report referred to, and that's described by the Anderson firm as an addendum to the first report. So the second report, the report of September 27th, 2023, only talks about the two collisions and otherwise incorporates and adopts what's in the first report. So you have to look at the first report to really get a sense of what is the data that council is being asked to deal with. Anderson report number 1 is dated June 29th, 2022. But the data was collected only on one day, September the 7th, 2021, between 7 and 9 in the morning and 4 to 6 in the afternoon. And that's on the assumption that those hours represented the peak hours of volume for that day. And whatever the volumes were for that day, these were assumed to be the baseline volumes for 2022. And then the authors assumed that there would be a 2%, as they describe it, conservative per annum growth of traffic on Glen Ridge for every ensuing year thereafter, and only 0.5% of growth for Lockhart Drive for any year after 2022. In my respectful submission, the developer has a huge problem in relying on this data. My wife and I moved to St. Catharines about 7 weeks after this data was collected on September the 7th, 2021. Members of council, I couldn't believe how quiet the city of St. Catharines was. There was little traffic anywhere. I could get from my home to the Home Depot near the YMCA building in 10 minutes flat. Mr. and Mrs. Green in their letter to council are absolutely correct. The huge and large shadow of COVID-19 was still very much hanging over our community. People were staying at home, many were working at home, restaurants still mostly surviving on takeout business, city buses operating on a reduced schedule, and I'm certain that Professors Kushner and Atkinson can confirm that in the fall of 2021, there was a significantly underpopulated campus at Brock because it was still in partial lockdown. So let's call a spade a spade. There were no true traffic periods of traffic between 7 and 9 in the morning and 4 to 6 at night on September the 7th, 2021. So what we have here, members of council, is a clear case of sample collection bias, taking a small sample during COVID-19 to get to a preordained result that the proposed project would have no deleterious effect on our neighborhood. I submit that such data from a short sample period collected exclusively during the COVID-19 pandemic is utterly unreliable and must be set aside as unworthy of consideration. Now let's look at the traffic study and the data with respect to Lockhart Drive. There isn't any. There's no data whatsoever with respect to Lockhart Drive. So we in the neighborhood, we know that there are people going in and out to the Hydro 1 substation all day long. There are school buses and going in Monday to Friday, et cetera. There's regular traffic coming into the neighborhood. There's people coming off of Marsdale cutting up to get over and up south to the campus, et cetera. We have not, and council have not been provided with appropriate data. What should have happened, in my respectful submission, is that we should have had actual vehicle loads for both Glen Ridge and Lockhart Drive from October 2024 or even early spring 2025 over 3 consecutive days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, between the hours of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., not just a 4-hour time frame. Such a sample size would have reflected Brock in full swing and full population, Hotel Dew Shaver in full operation, Niagara Regional Headquarters in full operation, the impact of the Walker Sports Center, normal room occupancy for the Sheraton Hotel, typical daily traffic on Glen Ridge to and from St. Catharines, from Thorold, Fonthill, Fenwick, and Welland. Normal municipal bus traffic and normal school bus traffic, plus the impact of the new crosswalk on Glen Ridge near Sovereign Drive and the impact of the new housing project on Glendale and Valerie Drive. We don't have it. Council doesn't have it. You have a 4-hour time frame from a suppressed, artificially suppressed period of time during COVID-19.
Mr. Neville?
Yes.
You've gone a little bit past. I've given you a little bit of leeway, but I'm going to ask you if you can sum up at this time.
It's quite all right. We should have actual vehicle loads for Lockhart and actual vehicle loads for Glen Ridge. We don't have them. And in my respectful submission, council must reject the traffic studies as inadequate. You can't accept this data. To do so sets a terrible precedent. These traffic studies are not reflective of the traffic whatsoever. So we don't know the actual impact of a new 22 apartment unit building with 29 parking spaces because the numbers you're working with in those reports are illusory. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, members of council.
Thank you, Mr. Neville. Are there any questions for Mr. Neville before he steps down? All right. Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation, sir. Folks, so there won't be any more clapping. There's no clapping in council chambers. If there is continued, if there's an outburst, there's more clapping, I will have the chambers cleared and we will continue on YouTube for the benefit of those who want to watch. But you can't clap in council chambers. Those are the rules. So I would ask, if we cannot do that again, it would be appreciated. Those are the rules we've governed ourselves by for at least the last 15 years. Thank you. I'll now call upon Bob Haig to speak. The lectern is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm addressing basically the same issue that the previous speaker did. We've lived on Wooddale Drive since 1988, quite a while. Wooddale is the first street off of Lockhart when you're coming from Glen Ridge. It's the first one. That means it's the closest place for overflow parking. That's one of the issues. I mean, the policy situation has been well explained many times tonight. I understand that, and I understand the context and sort of the urgency that you are under in order to approve proposals. In response to that original 2022 meeting, I pointed out a few things. I said, and these are essentially quotes from a letter I wrote back then, there are very few exits from the neighborhood, and residents of the proposed development will often opt for Marsdale rather than the difficult corner of Glenridge and Lockhart. And believe me, that is a difficult corner. I don't use it. I do not use it unless I'm going up the hill. Second, I said that Wooddale Drive, with its poor visibility, sharp downhill left turn, as soon as you turn off of Lockhart, you're going downhill, the left turn, with buildings and fence on the left, so you can't see around that corner. And it's a difficult corner to go down. It is increasingly used as a shortcut for people who are going from Lockhart down to Marsdale, because it's a shortcut. It isn't technically a shortcut, but it avoids a stop sign. So people come screaming down there on a regular basis by drivers and people that are in a hurry. The third thing I pointed out was that there's no parking restrictions on Wooddale at all. So there's very often cars parked on both sides of the street, meaning there's only room for one car to get through. And that is not an unusual occurrence, especially during the academic year. And to those points, I'll add that there's no sidewalks on Wooddale, or on Lockhart for that matter. And as things go in cycles, there are currently a growing number of young children in that neighborhood. So my concern is twofold. One is the overflow parking, and the second is just the volume that would be generated by this proposed development. Now, the traffic briefs have been discussed. They contain a tremendous amount of data about the corner of Glenridge and Lockhart. But given my earlier feedback about the neighborhood streets, I was kind of disappointed that they were not addressed at all. In fact, when city staff pointed out the concerns, it wasn't even listed there at all. There's no data, there's nothing about the neighborhood streets at all. They weren't even looked at. And yet the brief concludes that, and I quote, "The existing surrounding road network has sufficient capacity to accommodate the future site-generated traffic." There's no basis for that statement. It doesn't exist. Now, if the applicant was seeking a reduction in the parking standards, which they're not, I know they're not, but if they were, then they would be required to demonstrate such a change would not result in unacceptable levels of spillover parking in adjacent areas to cause negative impact to travel, traffic, and parking management. The developer's not asking for that. But common sense says that the official plan makes it clear that the impact on adjacent areas is something that should be considered. It hasn't been considered. The proposed development would double the number of residences on that one block of Lockhart between Glenridge and Wooddale, it would double the number. And to think that it wouldn't have an impact, it's hard to believe somebody could justify such a statement. It has to. It has to. And the staff report pointed out, it wasn't mentioned tonight, but it was pointed out that overflow parking on streets is to be expected, just as there's overflow parking from existing homes, and that's true. But nobody's ever looked at the volume of it. Nobody's tried to review that or provide any information to you about that. These streets were designed for a low-density neighborhood. And it's foolish to assume that all these residents are going to go out onto Glenridge from Lockhart. It's just not going to happen. So I'm asking that you defer this decision until a proper traffic study involving the neighborhood streets has been done. Now, I'm not a lawyer. There's all kinds of lawyers here. And I'm sure it can be argued that the developer has no obligation to do that, and that may be the case. And if that's the case, then the letter of the law does not support the spirit of the law in this particular case. And I suggest that due diligence requires that the city do that report and get that level of information before making a decision on the basis of a current crisis, housing crisis, that will impact that neighborhood essentially forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Harris.
Again, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the presenter, thanks for your presentation. I guess since you've been there since 1988, you said, I'm wondering if you could comment, what was the traffic like when it was the church? And I'm not sure if Captain John DeQ was open at that time too.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to know if there was any overflow parking problems when the church was in operation, or when I'm not sure when Captain John DeQ closed though, the traffic on Lockhart.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's relatively new. When we moved there, it was exceedingly quiet. Nobody drove on the street except the people that lived on the street. But yeah, that was then. This is now. It's different. I'm obviously not advocating for that.
And I totally understand your concerns about sidewalks, especially on Lockhart. And I believe we asked staff around 7 or 8 years ago to come up with a plan for sidewalks on Lockhart. So that's all I'd say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Dodge.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the presenter. You're asking us this evening about the traffic impact study and things that surround possibly your neighborhood with parking and whatnot. Is this the first time you're asking for that, or through the process have you asked for that information prior to tonight?
Concerns at the first opportunity in 2022 in writing.
Okay.
I was unable to attend the first public meeting. I sent a second letter when this public meeting was scheduled, was announced. So I have on 2 occasions.
And have you gotten a reply back to either one of those inquiries?
They weren't inquiries. They were providing feedback, and I understood that they would be circulated to council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dodge. Seeing no other questions, thank you, Mr. Haig, for your presentation. At this time, I will call upon Jeffrey Atkinson to speak. Mr. Atkinson, the lectern is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, staff, and councillors for allowing myself and my friends and neighbors to speak to this issue this evening. Some of you probably know a place, a country, a province, a state, a city, a town, even, dare I say, a neighborhood, where if you're not born there, you can't say you're from there. In Eastern Canada, we have that you're from away, right? If you're born on the rock, you're from there, but you never live there as a resident if you're born somewhere else, certainly not Toronto. I was born in Eastern Ontario, a place much colder than this, just outside of Ottawa. And when myself and my wife moved down here in 1993 for our careers, I was overjoyed when I came to see what Southern Ontario could really be like when you live here, with tender fruit, wine, pleasant weather, tulip trees, Carolinian forest. And I got the greatest gift of all. I got to live right next door to it at the escarpment on 211 Lockhart Drive. I've only lived here for 32 years. So if you count me a resident, I'd be gracious to be considered as such, because some of the nicest people I've known in my life have been born and raised here or in the assemblage of towns that feed into St. Catharines. But I've lived those 32 years across from the escarpment. I've seen it in all weathers, in all conditions, both joyous and not so joyous, with storms and traffic accidents and trying to get up the hill in the middle of winter. But it's a wonderful place. It was in about 2006 when I saw that a sign had been put up on Glenridge, understanding and advertising that the city and the region were recognizing it as a UNESCO World Heritage Site that they were welcoming people who were driving into this area to say, you're here, look what's before you. And I would dare to say that the region and the councillors, you're losing track of what your city is about. You're losing a value statement here. Because if you come down Glenridge and you read that sign, if this building is built, when you look up, you will not see the escarpment. You'll be advertising a joyous heritage that you will not be able to witness as you wing by up Glenridge and see only some kind of design on a building, which at 4 stories is at a place completely with the local neighborhood. That sign was put in place by one of your own, Jim Bradley, member of provincial legislature. And more recently, that was 2006, more recently the province tabled a bill, the More Homes Built Faster Act, which was to do just what we're contemplating today, which is to intensify housing in all places, especially in cities. And St. Catharines wasn't really too glad with the bill, and in their own words said, the city agrees that additional housing and supply is warranted. However, housing, I'll try and emphasize with my voice and tone, housing alone does not create community. Bill 23 has no regard or consideration for infrastructure funding, asset management, or environmental systems, public realm, and quality of space. That's the city's own words. Further, Bill 23 as presented fails to address the stated goals of increasing housing supply, housing affordability, and improved process, and instead will result in the loss of environmental protections, heritage conservation, urban design, and accountability to the public. The sightlines are taken as considerations for almost like you were a voyeur, you were going to be painting or something and you say, I got interrupted. But for people who live in this environment, that is part of what Southern Ontario and the Niagara Escarpment brings to the quality of life. The sun coming over the forest, the snow's coming through, the fogs and mists rolling off the hill, drastically different weather in Welland than there is in Southern St. Catharines, and you can witness all of that. Now we're going to have to walk down Lockhart and look at, I have to say, a monstrosity of a building design that is completely inappropriate for the neighborhood, and it's going to disrupt the sense of community that has always been there in my brief 32 years living here. I strongly urge the council to vote against this proposal and to keep St. Catharines on tab with what we have, which is so special, access to something like the escarpment, both visually and in every other sense of community and an enjoyment of those things we like to protect together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any questions of council? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Atkinson. Can I now call upon Janice Fedorowic to speak? Ms. Fedorowic, the lectern is yours.
Thank you. I come to you today, I'm a landscape architect, I'm an urban designer and an urban planner, and I've been doing it for 35 years. But I'm also a resident at 9 Leawood Court, and I would like to speak to you today from both of those perspectives and offer a response to some of the staff comments. So staff have said the policies in natural areas are to protect and promote long-term sustainability, and they argue that it removes some of the existing pavement and there's a 5-meter buffer. So I just ask you to consider the size of the asphalt that they're saying are going to be removed, and consider that compared to a 4-story apartment building. And the environmental impact of a 4-story apartment building by far exceeds removing some asphalt. And it doesn't matter, you can't really justify a 4-story apartment building to get rid of that asphalt, because any development that goes there will get rid of it. You could put up any type of development, that is going to happen. So there's no justification for that. And when we think about a 4-story apartment building, it uses a lot of building material. So if you look at that compared to a lesser form, you can't say it's sustainable. It is not sustainable. It is the opposite of sustainable, and that is against city policies. This area absolutely is a wildlife corridor. Anybody that has property that goes back onto the forest, we see deer all the time. We see them on the spring migration, we see them in the fall, we see them all the way through. They're in our front yards, in our backyards. We've even seen them going down Lockhart. And just a few weeks ago, there was a deer shot just 2 doors down from us by the police because it was injured. So you have to say that this absolutely is a wildlife corridor, and this was not in the EIS report. So the EIS report actually said there was no evidence of wildlife corridor, but ask anybody who lives here. We see deer all the time. This is a wildlife corridor, and unfortunately, the NEC did not have that information when they made their decision. So again, the other gentleman talked about having the wrong information for the traffic report. They also had the wrong information for the wildlife corridor. Sorry. There we go. So I would just like to say that because of that, it is against the natural area policies of the Niagara Escarpment Plan and these 3 policies of the GCP. It is against the natural heritage policies. So staff have said, we are satisfied with the siting and design is appropriate and compatible because the building has appropriate setbacks and landscaping. But this site is entirely unique. There's nothing like it in the city. It is against a world-class biosphere region. And there is no amount of setbacks and no amount of landscaping that will say that this does not have a huge visual impact in this corner. There is nothing that you can say about that. It definitely is blocking views to the escarpment, and I'll show you that in a minute. But besides that, this is a site that is forward-facing to the community. That means that it's not just looking out just onto an arterial road, it's looking out onto a local road that people go by all the time. I myself, I go by that site maybe 2 or 3 times a day. And there's people living across from it and near it. And we will all be affected by whatever goes on this site. So here's an image. I did this myself. I did it in SketchUp digital terrain modeling, and I'm bound by my profession to show it accurately. This is what it's going to look like. And this is at Woodside Drive in Glenridge. This image was not in the visual impact assessment. So again, the decisions were made without the amount of information that they should have had. So you can clearly see that 4 stories completely blocks the escarpment. 3 stories isn't much better, but 2 stories would actually be something that would be a lot more appropriate for this development. And then we talk about compatibility. So just look at these comparisons. There is nothing similar between the architectural styles of the new development and the existing. There's nothing in terms of style, scale, form, roof line, nothing. So these are all things that we are compelled to have a look at. What is compatible? And there is no compatibility here. So because of that, it does not comply with the Niagara Region Plan with regards to heritage features and compatibility, as well as the Niagara Escarpment Plan in terms of scenic quality, and these 3 parts of the Garden City Plan. It is clearly in violation of that. So staff have said that the proposed development improves the streetscape through the infill of vacant lands and demonstrates context sensitivity. I just ask you to look at this picture and see, does this improve the streetscape? Does a building of this size and scale improve it? And the answer, of course, is absolutely not. So I have drawn the trees on there at the actual size that they will be when the building is first installed. And they will stay that way for about the first 3 to 5 years. Because when you install trees, especially up against an arterial road, they don't grow right away. They're fighting for survival, and they're just trying to get their foot in. So this is what it's going to look like for the first 5 years. And then it will eventually start to grow, and in decades from now, it's going to cover up the building. But I ask you, why are we putting in a building that we're hoping to cover up? And it won't even cover up for decades from now. So I would just ask you to really consider that when you're looking at the visual impact, that it's going to be a visual impact for a long, long time, and only then it will be covered up eventually by trees, and that will only be for 6 months of the year, because in the winter, we'll be able to see the entire building. So because of that, it is not compliant with these sections of the official plan. Yes,
I would ask you just to sum up, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. I won't go into this, but here's 3 more reasons why it is not compatible and reasons to not approve. But in conclusion, I would just like to say that I hope that I have given you enough reasons as to why this is actually not in conformity, and there certainly would be grounds for appeal. But I just want to say, even more than that, how much this is going to affect the lives of thousands of residents that drive by and experience this every day. We love our views of the escarpment. That's why we're there. We want to be close to nature, and this goes completely against what our whole neighborhood is all about. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Do we have any questions from members of council? Councillor Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Given that you're opposed to this development, what would be the alternatives?
So what we're asking is that, that the City Council today, that you do not approve what is there, but keep what is there right now. So right now it's a low-density residential, and to work within the parameters of what is permitted there, but not to approve something that will give us such a large building that's going to take away from our community.
Okay, anything specific?
So it could be any different type of form. For me, what I'm mostly concerned about is the height and scale of what is proposed. I'm not as concerned about the land use myself personally. I can't speak for my neighbors, but I'm not as concerned about the land use. If it stays residential, if it became a community center, that would be great. Maybe a nature interpretation, that would be lovely. But for me, it's about what is in scale with the community and what is blocking views to the escarpment.
Okay, and I gather you're saying that what is being proposed is contrary to what our requirements are for compatibility.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. There is, there's almost zero compatibility between the two, between the building forms.
Thank you, Councillor Kushner. Seeing no other questions, thank you, Ms. Fedorowicz, for your presentation. Does anyone else in attendance wish to speak on this issue today? Just asking one more time. Does anyone else in attendance wish to speak at this time? Sir, come on forward. We'll just ask you to say your name into the microphone so that we have it for the record. You're very welcome. The lectern is yours.
Councillors, I will be extremely brief. I mean, the 4 presentations before me were very telling, very articulate, and very clear, and already provide enough reasons to turn down the request to change the zoning. I would like to speak about privacy
Can we just ask for your name?
Yes, my name is Ben El-Meshayek.
Thank you very much.
And I live on Camelot Court, looking right on the new building and right on the balcony that will be actually looking right there on my backyard. And obviously, I came to St. Catharines in 1988, and I chose to live in the South End on Camelot Court precisely to be near the escarpment. And now, with this new building, obviously I will lose all sense of privacy, especially that there is a balcony that's planned there, and that's absolutely, to me, unacceptable. Of course, in addition to the loss of the visuals of the escarpments, but the issue of privacy is of primary concern to me and to all of my neighbors that are also actually on Camelot Court. So, I mean, that's, I think, should be taken into considerations. I don't think that, I mean, developers that are coming from out of town should be, I mean, allowed to just, I mean, have it their way, despite and against, I mean, the wills of long-standing residents. Councillors, I urge you to turn down the motion and not to change the zoning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions for the presenter? All right, seeing none, thank you for your presentation. Are there any other individuals in attendance today that would like to speak? You'd have to come up. And if you could just mention your name so that we have it for the record.
Hi, I'm Joe. I'm a local resident. I was just curious if I don't have anything to say tonight, will I have an opportunity to at another time?
This is the final opportunity.
This is the final opportunity. I feel very ill-prepared, so it's probably not going to come out very eloquently, but I guess the concern is about like setting precedents. Everything that everyone has said so far, I think you articulated it so well. I'm so impressed with my neighbors. I wish I knew you more personally because I think that you present so many valid points. But the concern is that we've had something in the neighborhood happen a few years ago where they slipped in some townhouses that were totally opposed to the neighborhood. And I don't know how it got through. I wasn't around when that happened, but it happened. And everyone's always very concerned about things happening like this again. So we had townhouses come in an area that didn't make sense for them to be there, but they're there somehow. And now we have this building being proposed to put in, and that also seems very out of place. So suddenly what everyone is moving to that neighborhood for is being like pulled from under them, and it's very unsettling. And so I think it's just important to consider everything that everyone has already brought up, but also to understand what's going to happen when this gets put in. How are we going to avoid other things from passing through? So I totally get that, the population is increasing and people need homes, and I can appreciate that, but at the same time, how do you manage? Finding places for people to live, but also making sure that things aren't passing through that shouldn't be. So anyway, sorry, I don't know if that makes any sense. I just thought I'd mention that.
No, it makes complete sense, actually. So thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions of the presenter? Seeing none, if you just want to stop with our council coordinator on the side there, that would be great. Is there anybody else who would like to speak to this item? I'm going to ask one final time. Is there anybody who would like to speak to this item? All right, seeing none, at this time, can I have a motion to close the public meeting? Councillor Phillips, Councillor Townsend. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. The public meeting is now closed and council is called to order. Persons wishing to receive notice of council's decision should submit a written request to the office of the city clerk. At this time, I need a mover and a seconder to move the recommendation in the report. Councillor Miller is moving, Councillor McPherson is seconding. At this time, councillors can provide their comment they can ask questions of staff. So I see Councillor Townsend is first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. One of the presenters mentioned it didn't meet some of the requirements within the Niagara Escarpment. We have this conditional approval from the Niagara Escarpment Commission with pretty extravagant requests for the developer to meet. I'm just wondering if staff can comment on some of what was presented on that it didn't comply with the Niagara Escarpment plan, but meanwhile, the Niagara Escarpment Commission has given it a conditional approval.
Through the mayor to the councillor, could you provide a little bit more clarification? The Niagara Escarpment Commission conditionally approved their development permit because it does comply with their requirements and the Niagara Escarpment plan.
Okay, no, thank you. That was I guess my point is that we had a presentation that suggested that it didn't comply, but according to the notice of decision from the Niagara Escarpment Commission, it does comply, and it based on the conditions that they have to meet, which if they don't meet any of these conditions that are laid out, that means that their approval would be rescinded?
Through the mayor, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Councillor Lindell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the Director of Environmental Facilities and Environmental Services. Have we actually looked at doing a proper traffic study down in that area for this building?
Through the mayor to the councillor, we have not. Normally traffic studies related to developments are carried out by the developer. And the traffic studies that we have are about the same vintage as what was identified in the report.
And again, through you, Mr. Mayor, would we be able to look at the parking on Wood Gale and make it limited parking on either one side or the other? And
so, Councillor, I'm actually going to say,
okay.
I don't think that can actually be a part of what we're talking about right now. It could definitely, and I had a feeling councillors may want to go that way.
Okay.
When we get to report requests, I think that's when we want to address some of those concerns, but it can't be a part of what we're doing right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lindell. Councillor Miller.
Yeah, just what's our standard for when we require a traffic impact study for a development like this? Like how many units would it be?
Mr. Ritchie?
Yeah, through the mayor, excuse me, through the mayor to the councillor, on a project like this, which has, it's on a regional, it's basically a regional intersection, so we would look to Niagara region to make the determination on whether or not the magnitude of the project is significant enough to warrant a traffic study. That was not the case for this project. If the project was just on a local street, staff would make that determination. There isn't a firm number. It's typically done based on our historical understanding of traffic volumes on that street relative to the magnitude of parking and trips that are expected to be generated by the development. In this instance, neither the city's traffic department or the region's transportation engineers required a traffic study. One was provided by the applicant in support of their application in an attempt to address some of the concerns that they expected to hear from the community, but it was not a city or regional requirement.
Okay, I'm just recall, like I know other cities have that a standard of about 100 units added is when a traffic study, and I know that in our last term of council, the old Brickyard development in Meriton, we were looking at 500 or something units on much more condensed streets, and we were told that there wasn't going to be a significant impact to local traffic. So I'm just curious. This one, 22 units, half of which, the intersection's one of the busier streets in the city. So I'm just curious what our staff, I guess, impression of the traffic impact's going to be, because I would think it would be incredibly minimal if we're looking at 22 units, that peak hour adding. But so did we have any input on that, or we were just deferred it to the region?
Through the mayor to the councillor, as the manager of planning identified, the region would be the one to request a traffic impact study for this location. However, the number that you indicated at 100 units is generally the mark that we look at for the trigger for traffic impact studies. Based on the fact there's only 22 units at this location, we don't feel that there'll be a significant impact to the existing traffic.
Okay, has there been any, and perhaps you don't have this offhand, speed tests or anything like that on Lockhart in the last, 5-10 years, or?
Through the mayor to the councillor, I believe the last time we did a study here was in 2022. It was for speeds. It wasn't for volumes, and it did identify traffic calming measures that could be implemented. However, when we went out to the residents, we didn't get enough engagement that would allow us to trigger implementing any traffic calming on the street.
Okay, so that's something we could look at if this development does add a lot of traffic. Okay, that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I certainly will not be supporting the staff recommendation, and my reasons are the reasons expressed by the area residents. First, when we hear that the traffic studies are faulty, I find that very disturbing, so that's one reason. If we're going to have them, we should ensure that they're proper, that they're not faulty. Secondly, we've had Mr. Haig talk about the increase in traffic on a road which originally was designed as a non-urban road with ditches and so on, and the traffic has increased substantially there. He did indicate that people use it for a shortcut, and I must admit I'm one of them, but when I take the shortcut, I don't travel at high speed, but others behind me do push me along. Now, Mr. Atkinson talked about the building being incompatible, and this is a problem we're having as we increase intensification. Our requirement is that the buildings are compatible, and I must say the high rises we've been agreeing to, in which I agreed to, are not compatible with the neighborhoods. So I think that deserves a study as to whether we want that in or modify what we mean by compatibility. Fourthly, we've heard from, I think it's Miss Janes, who's an urban planner, that she talked about the wildlife, and that when she moved in, there is much more wildlife, and now with the increased traffic, et cetera, that is a diminishing factor. So I have no doubt that what the area residents stated tonight is correct. And I was also add one other factor, and the factor is, does this become a precedent for other development on Lockhart? And I know we have open spaces there, and I would hate to see them make the argument that because we did this, that is a precedent for what they can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kushner. Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The one argument that was made was that the environmental footprint, that being the resources, natural resources, the energy used and the greenhouse gas emissions in the scale of a building would be greater than in single-family dwellings. But, and I'll put this to staff, even though we don't have our Mr. Green here tonight, to complete 22 units in one facility versus building 22 detached or townhouses, wouldn't the ecological footprint be lesser when you do it when it's all together in one single development?
Through the mayor, that is correct, and especially considering the amount of land that would be required as well. So.
Thank you. And then another question is, was the discussion about affordable units in this particular development discussed?
Through the mayor, not at this present stage. Hasn't been disclosed what the tenancy will be.
Okay, thank you. And then if council were to vote contrary to planning staff's recommendation, I wonder if you could explain the arduous provincial appeal process that we have to go through if council did say no to this or defer it or refer it or something.
Through the mayor to the councillor, should council not support the application that's before them tonight, the owner of the land would have the option, should they choose to exercise it, to appeal council's decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. It would then be council would then have to determine whether or not how they wanted to participate in that hearing and in what capacity.
And then at that hearing, what position would our planning staff be in? Would we rely on your evidence, or how would that work?
Through the mayor to the councillor, and legal, please correct me if I'm off here, but I would expect it would not be uncommon for the appellant, in this case the owner, to summon planning staff to give evidence at the tribunal to explain why we recommended approval. If council wished to have planning evidence in support of council's decision, you would need to go external for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One thing I heard in all these reports that I've never heard before is the fact that the Niagara Escarpment Commission's actually dictating the color of the building and some of the usage of glass, because I know city planning, we cannot do that ever. So that's a big plus. So if they're telling them to paint it green so it blends in with the environment more or whatever, as opposed to that's just a conceptual drawing we saw. So the colors aren't going to necessarily be that color. So that's a good step on the NRP's the Niagara Commission thing, because those guys are sticklers. My term on the Committee of Adjustment, their rules and their ruling on stuff was prohibitive on most things. So them allowing that and keeping that space in the backside there, I think they've done really well with that, and they've realized that this is probably a good development for the use of the land.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Dodge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering if it's possible moving forward that if this were to pass tonight, if the developer and the residents could maybe work on some of the issues that they have and come to some sort of agreement that would be more palatable to everyone. Is it too late in the process for that?
Through the mayor to the councillor, the Niagara Escarpment Commission has already issued a conditional approval of this project. I would expect that it's what the applicant developer intends to proceed with, provided council grants the official plan amendment. Because of the NEC permit process, they don't have a lot of latitude to continue, to make further changes to the building without basically re-entering that process. I do want to acknowledge that there would be a time issue reinitiating the NEC.
They could work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dodge. Are there any other speakers to the motion? All right, seeing none at this time, I will look to the clerk to call the roll.
Councillor Miller.
Yes.
Councillor McPherson.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
Councillor Lindell.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Ratzlaff.
Yes.
Councillor Stevens.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
Councillor Harris.
No.
Councillor Kushner.
No.
Mayor Cisco.
Yes.
That is carried.
Moving on to item number 9, discussion reports, and 9.1, legal and clerk services, Office of the City Clerk, declaration of vacancy, Office of City Councillor, Ward 6, Port Dalhousie Ward, and methods to fill a vacancy for Office of Councillor. Last week, staff emailed the members of City Council and requested that anyone interested in serving on the Budget Standing Committee submit their name to the Office of the City Clerk. Councillors Stevens and Williamson have put their names forward. We will go to a ballot system for those councillors in person. For the councillors we don't have, we'll pause for a moment. Councillor Harris.
Can we appoint 2 people? Or is there some sort of things in the terms of reference that we can't?
Terms of reference, and you start, in that case, we would be at a majority of council? That would be a majority of council. The current composition is 5 plus the mayor. If you add another, you're now at a majority of council, which means you have quorum, which means it's an illegal meeting. All right, so I'm going to start again. Councillors Stevens and Williamson put their names forward, so we will go to a ballot system for all the councillors. We are all in person, so there is no need to worry about Zoom. This is for who we would like to appoint to the Budget Standing Committee. Staff will tally the results to prepare the motion for council's consideration. So at this time, record your ballots. Have we received all of the ballots? All right, so while we are tallying up the votes in the back, we have a recommendation on the floor. Councillor Williamson is moving the recommendation. And can I get Councillor Phillips to second the recommendation? So the recommendation on the floor is that council select option number 2, as detailed herein as the method to fill a vacancy for office of City Councillor Ward 6. That we approve the necessary funding from the election reserve to support that option. And we will wait to see who the councillor's name is to be appointed to the Budget Standing Committee. That will be done, I believe, before. Well, Councillor Williamson wants to speak to the motion. So I will look now to Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and be brief. To me, the by-election option is by far the best choice since it most closely executes both the spirit and the intent of our policy, and in this case, our policy is a good one. The city's policy has been arrived at through a thoughtful and deliberative process, and it is a sensible one. A by-election is the most democratic, most transparent, most inclusive, and most equitable method available at this juncture. Elections are the cornerstone of democracy, and there's no other alternative that is fair or more open. Allowing citizens to decide their representation through the ballot box is the clear choice here, and I encourage my fellow councillors to support it. I'm also certain that Carlos would have preferred this option.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Miller.
Yeah, thank you. I think typically I'd be in favor of a by-election in this case. I think my concerns are the price tag is significant. I mean, we're looking at probably $100,000. And that we're looking at a ward that had 33% voter turnout in the full election, with a contested mayoral election, which would drive up the turnout a little bit, and not right in the middle of a Canadian federal election, which ours would almost certainly be. So I think, we have a third place. Somebody came third in 2022, got almost 2,000 votes. I don't think we're going to get 2,000 people to vote in a by-election. I think that, we had 5,200 votes cast, so let's say 3,000 voters in the full election. I don't think that's democratic at all to run a by-election and hope voter turnouts probably 15% of the ward. I think that would be optimistic at best. So I think we have a candidate who ran, who's very involved in the community, was just here at council last month on behalf of the community. So I just don't see spending $100,000 taxpayers' money to have an election where someone who wins will really have no mandate at all with such a low voter turnout. I think we're better off saving that time and get back to a full complement of councillors sooner, and have Port Dalhousie fully represented sooner. I think it's our best option. So I'm not in favor of option 2. I'd rather just appoint the third place candidate. I know, as Councillor Williamson pointed out, it doesn't strictly fill our guidelines, but we have modified those guidelines to great success in the past, and I think this is a good opportunity to do so again.
Great success. Councillor Lindell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually come from a place where the third place candidate got more than 70% of a vote and ended up in a by-election and ended up winning it. So I know this third place runner-up only got 63%, so he didn't meet Councillor Kushner. I think you were the... there's nothing that's stopping this third place runner from running in a by-election. There's still 2 years left on this term. I would understand if we were going to appoint or do a interview process if there was 6, 7, 8 months left, but there's still 2 years. And I think that the people of Port Dalhousie do deserve to sit down now and decide whether or not they want a new person on council. It's their riding. It's a democratic process. I know for a fact that the people of Port Dalhousie will, come out and vote. They're very passionate about their ward. They're very passionate about their city councillors. I'm not worried about a federal election because by the time Parliament might get triggered again, there's still 90 days after that, which would be in May or June. And this will be done by April. So I would also encourage everyone, it's a democratic thing to have a by-election and have the people of Port Dalhousie say, this is the person that I want to represent me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lindell. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I'm all for a by-election. I mean, I argued back at the beginning of this term that when Chair Bradley, Councillor Bradley got appointed to chair of the region, that we have a by-election. The ruling was they may and not shall, but I was voted down on that. But I'm glad to see the talk is now that we do a democratic way and elect the person to win this. And I hope no other councilors really talk on this, because staff estimate was first about 90, and after Councillor Miller was talking, it's gone up to 100. So God forbid, the next couple of councillors, it's going to go up to 120 or 40 or something, God forbid. So I hope we want to keep that in check. So.
Wow. All right. Councillor Kushner.
Mr. Mayor, I totally concur with Councillor Lindell. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Phillips.
Yes, obviously, I'll support a by-election. I think it's the way to go democratically. Just a question to the clerk.
To the clerk.
Through the mayor to the councillor. So January 27th, council will receive their bylaw to enact the by-election and authorize vote counting equipment, which will be by tabulator, which we've always done at our polls. Nominations will open January 28th. They will close February 28th at 2 p.m. Advanced voting would start April 3rd and 12th, and then voting day would be April 14th. And we would be swearing in a new councillor on April 28th.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Yeah, I'll be brief. Full support of doing a by-election. Port Dalhousie has been served by two long-time serving councillors for the last decade. So I'm sure they'll show up in full force to elect their newly appointed councillor, and I'm sure I believe it was Councillor Williamson's point, Councillor Garcia would be in favor of a by-election, considering he did top the ballot and beat Councillor Williamson by 6 votes. So 5 votes.
It's a bit of a dig there, but okay. All right, so I have no other speakers on the list. I will just let everybody know Councillor Stevens won the vote, and so the motion will include that Councillor Stevens be appointed to the Budget Standing Committee for the duration of the term of council. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, I will look to the clerk to call the roll.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Ratzlaff.
Yes.
Councillor Stevens.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
Councillor Harris.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Councillor Lindell.
Yes.
Councillor McPherson.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
I'm saying no, but not to the Councillor Stevens part, just so he knows that.
Mayor Cisco.
Yes.
That's carried.
And please note that Councillor Miller was in favor of Councillor Stevens in the minutes. Moving on to 10.2, so we're back to the motions. The Anti-Racism Advisory Committee recommendations for RZone policy. This is being moved by Councillor Miller and seconded by Councillor Ratzlaff. Before debate, though, I believe Mr. Christie had some comments, so I will look to Mr. Christie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, I just wanted to make the committee minutes reflect, I think, the end result that we're all after. The RZone policy was written specifically for city-owned recreational facilities. And as such, the language contained in that policy doesn't apply to all members of the public. So, and certainly I'm not a lawyer. I just would hate to put the corporation in a position where language and existing policies we won't be able to hold them up. So I'm hoping that the mover and the seconder would support staff looking into coming up with similar language that would apply more broadly.
So would you suggesting a referral back to staff with the understanding that this information be contained as a part of whatever this new policy or existing changed policy looks like? Councillor Miller, would you like to move that referral? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that's that different than what really is being asked. It was just being asked that those recommendations be considered by city staff. So I think that's actually kind of probably in line, as long as those recommendations are considered when we're looking at the RZone policy or other potential implications. I think that's fine.
So I think then a referral asking that report that Mr. Christie's talking about come back, because there had already been a motion about the RZone policy.
Right.
That report come back so that we consider it for inclusion in an updated RZone policy, which has already been asked for. Mr. Christie, are you comfortable with that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes.
Okay, so Councilor.
Yeah, I think as long as the recommendations are also being considered as part of that RZone policy review, where they can be, because there was a number of recommendations, that's fine, yeah.
Okay, so then we'll call that a motion to refer. It's not debatable, but if you have a question, Councilor Dodge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering, like, you know, it's referred to as the R zone and stuff like that. Is there somewhere that in the next information that we could have some more information that's more public so that, you know, just the general public would know what the reference is being made here?
Okay. If we can look to Mr. Christie and your staff, if you can forward the RZone policy to council, maybe for inclusion as a part of the council correspondence package so that it's publicly available for the next correspondence package. Would that suit what you're looking for, Councillor?
Yeah, I think that's perfect because I think that we all know what we're talking about, but the general public are kind of going, what is that?
I think that's a very valid point. Councillor Phillips, was there something else related to the referral? Yeah, shoot.
To Mr. Christie or to legal, the RZone policy wasn't written by us. It's, as was mentioned, it's specific to athletic facilities. Can we modify the RZone policy to suit our needs, or is it so specific that it is the RZone policy, here it is, it's implemented by St. Catharines, Kingston, Windsor, whoever, and it is what it is? Given that, then we would have to, and I'm not disagreeing with what is wanted here, but we would need a specific policy to apply to different facilities, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. So RZone is, for lack of a better term, a brand, if you will.
Right.
So it's used by many other municipalities for the same reason, for recreational facilities. I believe it started in Burlington at their arenas. So if council is open to it, I think we probably would like to go down a road where we would develop an overarching policy under which the RZone policy could somewhat exist.
So it could be part of the RZone policy if we applied it to, say, the Performing Arts Center or any other municipal facilities like City Hall.
It already does, but yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we have a motion to refer. It's non-debatable. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. All right, so moving on, we have a call for notice of motions. Are there any calls for notice of motion for the next meeting? Seeing none. Report requests. First, we have Councillor Stevens would like a report on the special event fee reduction. I also, Councillor Lindell, you were asking for a report on possible traffic calming options in the Lockhart neighborhood? Yeah. Okay. Councillor, can you turn your mic on? Perfect.
Not only that, but perhaps the Director of Engineering Facilities and Environmental Services could look back to the idea of a sidewalk that was asked for about 8 years ago.
I'm sure that the director and whoever's writing the report will look back at historical asks.
Who was that person? Dan something that used to be the manager of environmental?
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay.
All right, are there any other report requests? All right, seeing none. Oh, and Councillor Williamson, you were looking for a report on the penalties to disincentivize flipping affordable to non-affordable units. So just put penalties regarding disincentivization of lack of affordability of housing units. And then we'll go back and look at the tape. All right, seeing no other report requests. All those in favor of the report requests? Opposed? That is carried. Committee and task force minutes. Can I have a mover to receive and file the minutes? Moved by Councillor Phillips, seconded by Councillor Ratzlaff, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Closed session, there is none. Motion from closed, there is none. Bylaws, that the bylaws listed on the council agenda as 8E be read a first time, considered and passed, and that they be signed and executed by the mayor and the clerk. Mover, Councillor Stevens, seconder, Councillor Townsend. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Lindell. Councillor Stevens, all those in favor? Opposed? Good night.